My name is Cynthia Cunningham. I am 42 years old. 30 days ago, I stood on the wet slate pathway of a Portland botanical garden, holding a wrapped silver serving tray, and listened to my husband tell me I was too humiliating to be seen in public. What I did 1 hour later made my mother-in-law lose her $8.8 million mansion, ruined my husband's political career, and exposed a secret that had been draining my bank accounts for 14 years. Before I tell you how a simple text message brought down an entire Oregon timber dynasty, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Emily Told Stories, but only if you genuinely enjoy it. And I would love to know, how old are you and where are you watching from? The air that Saturday afternoon smelled of damp pine needles and incoming rain. Inside the glass conservatory, a string quartet played a delicate arrangement for my sister-in-law Natalie and her wedding. I was not inside. A private security guard had just informed me my name was missing from the guest list. Before I could ask him to check again, the heavy oak doors opened. Preston stepped out. My husband of 14 years looked immaculate in a tailored charcoal tuxedo. He walked down the stone steps and stopped right in front of me. He did not reach for my hand. He simply blocked the path. "Why is security stopping me?" I asked, keeping my tone even. Preston glanced over his shoulder to ensure the arriving guests could not hear us. His jaw tightened. "My mother does not want you there." The damp chill of the afternoon seeped directly through my silk dress. "Excuse me." He leaned closer, bringing the scent of his expensive cologne with him. "You are an embarrassment." People expect a betrayed spouse to scream. They expect tears or theatrical gasps. I provided none of those. Instead, my chest went perfectly still. I studied the face of the man I loved. I saw the familiar condescension in his eyes, the subtle sneer he usually reserved for his political opponents. To him and to his mother Lucille, I would always be the dirt under the fingernails farm girl from the Willamette Valley. My sustainable agriculture tech firm generated more revenue in a single quarter than his lobbying firm saw in a decade. But to the old money timber crowd, I was just a functional utility, a checkbook without a pedigree. I did not argue. I did not beg for entry. I opened my clutch, pulled out my phone, and typed one word in our message thread. Understood. I hit send, slipped the device back into my purse, turned on my heel, and walked away. The rhythmic click of my heels against the wet pavement was the only sound accompanying my retreat. I reached my car, slid into the leather driver's seat, and closed the door, sealing out the cold air and the faint music drifting from the conservatory. My hands gripped the steering wheel. I did not cry. My mind, usually occupied with crop yield algorithms and supply chain logistics, pivoted to a singular, glaring fact. Tuesday. Just 3 days prior, I had authorized a wire transfer to clear decades of accrued back taxes and secure the title on a sprawling cliffside estate in Cannon Beach. It was Lucille's dream home, a legacy property designed to cement the family's status among the coastal elite. $8.8 million drained directly from my personal accounts to buy peace. I stared through the windshield at the towering evergreens framing the parking lot. The paradox crystallized with brutal clarity. They viewed me as an uncultured liability, yet they relied entirely on my capital to maintain their facade. I had not bought a house. I had funded my own erasure. I pressed the start button. The engine hummed to life. Generosity without boundaries is not kindness. It is permission. And as I shifted the car into drive, I made a silent, unbreakable promise to myself. If I was a liability, I would no longer be their silent benefactor. The bank was closed. The rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers marked the passing seconds. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, watching the rain blur the pristine landscaping of the botanical garden. Water cascaded down the glass, distorting the silhouettes of late-arriving guests hurrying toward the conservatory. My hands rested at 10 and 2 on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. My knuckles were pale, but my breathing remained slow and measured. The engine idled, pushing warm air through the vents, doing little to chase away the deep chill settling into my bones. "You are an embarrassment." Preston had delivered the sentence with the casual precision of a seasoned politician. He did not yell, he did not gesture. He simply severed our 14-year partnership to protect his mother from mild social discomfort. For more than a decade, I had played the convenient background character in his carefully curated narrative. Preston portrayed himself as the modern face of an Oregon timber dynasty. He wore bespoke suits, drank expensive scotch, and spent his days in Salem lobbying lawmakers to keep ancient forests open for extraction. He was charming and connected. He possessed a smile that made people feel like they were the only person in the room. I was the opposite. I built my fortune in the fertile dirt of the Willamette Valley. My sustainable agriculture technology firm mapped soil hydrology and engineered drought-resistant crop cycles. My days were spent analyzing drone telemetry and reviewing sensor data with farmers wearing mud-stained boots. I generated wealth by nurturing the land. Preston maintained his lifestyle by taking from it. We were the perfect paradox. The aristocratic heir whose industry was slowly dying, married to the working-class girl whose innovation was rapidly scaling. I assumed we were building a life together. I believed my capital provided the stability his family needed, while he navigated the changing political climate. I was wrong. My money did not buy a partnership. It bought a mask for his fragile ego. That fragile ego required constant, expensive maintenance. Lucille was the primary architect of their financial drain. 6 months ago, she decided her historic Portland neighborhood lacked the exclusivity she deserved. She began leaving real estate brochures on my kitchen counter. She talked endlessly about needing a coastal legacy estate where she could host civic fundraisers and entertain the political elite. She fixated on a specific property in Cannon Beach. The house featured weathered gray shingles, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Pacific Ocean, and a private path down to the sand. The price tag matched the dramatic views. Preston came to me citing a temporary cash flow issue with his lobbying firm. He claimed there were lingering tax obligations tying up his personal assets. He asked me to cover the purchase, promising to reimburse the funds once his legislative contracts renewed. I agreed because I valued peace over friction. I authorized the $8.8 million transfer to secure the property and clear the supposed tax liens. But my agrarian roots taught me to always secure the fence line before letting the herd graze. I did not put the deed in his name or hers. I funneled the transaction through a blind corporate holding company I solely managed, Pacific Horizon Holdings. I drafted a residential lease naming Lucille as a month-to-month tenant. Preston handed her the paperwork over dinner one night, casually calling it standard insurance documentation. She signed it without reading a single paragraph. She spent the next 3 months bragging to her social circle about the oceanfront mansion her successful son had purchased for her. I never corrected the record. I remained silent to protect his pride. Sitting in the damp isolation of my car, a distinct memory surfaced, piercing the quiet hum of the engine. A rainy Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago, I was standing at our granite kitchen island, sorting the Daily Mail while sipping black coffee. Most of it was routine until I picked up a thick, heavy envelope. The return address featured the embossed logo of a Chicago-based private equity firm. It was not a conventional wealth management group. I recognized the name from industry journals. They specialized in predatory lending, distressed asset liquidations, and high-interest mezzanine debt. They were the financial equivalent of vultures circling a wounded animal. Before I could examine the postmark, Preston stepped into the kitchen. He moved with sudden, startling speed. He snatched the envelope from my fingers so quickly the paper sliced a thin red line across my thumb. He forced a hollow laugh, stuffing the letter into his briefcase. "Just political fundraising trash," he said, his voice pitching a fraction too high. "They never stop asking for donations." At the time, I let the incident slide. I had a board meeting in an hour and a dozen quarterly reports to review. But right now, watching the rain hit the windshield, his lie felt palpable. A timber lobbyist pushing standard state legislation does not receive unsolicited physical mail from a predatory debt fund. The puzzle pieces began shifting, aligning into a very dark picture. I looked back toward the conservatory. The faint sound of a cello drifted through the wet air. Natalie was likely walking down the aisle right now, flanked by floral arrangements I paid for. The guests were preparing to toast the newlyweds with imported champagne I purchased. Preston was standing near the altar, wearing cufflinks I gifted him, playing the role of the benevolent, wealthy brother. And I was sitting in a parking lot, barred from entry because my working-class roots offended their delicate sensibilities. The realization washed over me, stripping away years of carefully constructed excuses. I had not bought a family. I had financed parasites. Generosity without boundaries does not earn respect. It simply funds your own erasure. The hurt I felt 10 minutes ago evaporated, replaced by a cold mechanical precision. I reached into my purse and retrieved my phone. I scrolled past the unanswered messages from my logistics team and found the contact for my personal wealth manager, Gideon. The call connected on the second ring. "Cynthia," he answered, sounding surprised. "I thought you were at the wedding today." "There has been a change of plans," I replied, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I need you to execute an immediate hard freeze on all discretionary family trusts and secondary accounts." The line went silent for a brief moment. "A hard freeze," he repeated. "You mean the accounts currently linked to Preston and Lucille?" "All of them," I confirmed. "Suspend every credit line, every joint debit card, and every automatic draft. Nullify the authorized user status on my primary platinum cards." Gideon was a professional. He did not ask for the emotional reasoning, he only asked for the timeline. "When do you want this to take effect?" "Right now," I said. I ended the call and lowered the phone. The logistics of the modern financial system are remarkably efficient. Within 60 seconds, the digital arteries keeping the Timber dynasty afloat would be clamped shut. The wedding reception, scheduled to begin in less than an hour, was entirely dependent on those specific credit lines. The caterers, the bartenders, the string quartet, and the venue coordinators would soon be running the final authorization charges. The screens would flash a polite but unyielding decline. I shifted the car into drive and slowly pulled out of the parking lot. I left the botanical garden behind, steering toward the highway. I did not feel vindictive. I felt the profound, weightless relief of a woman who had finally decided to stop carrying the people who were trying to bury her. The first ripple of reality was about to crash into Preston, and he had no idea the tide had already gone out. The drive south via Interstate 5 offered a familiar rhythm. Rain continued to wash the city in shades of slate and emerald as I navigated the slick asphalt toward Lake Oswego. The tires hummed against the wet pavement, a steady drone that mirrored the newfound quiet settling inside my chest. For 14 years, my mind had operated like a high-frequency processor, constantly anticipating Preston and Lucille, anticipating their moods, their social obligations, their financial shortfalls. Now, the processor had shut down that specific background application. The sudden mental bandwidth felt entirely foreign. I crossed the Willamette River, glancing at the dark water churning below the bridge. Water always finds the path of least resistance. Preston had operated on the same principle. He flowed toward whatever capital allowed him to maintain the illusion of grandeur without requiring actual labor. My company engineered systems to prevent soil erosion and optimize water retention for commercial farms. We built infrastructure to sustain life. Preston built nothing. He extracted. He lobbied to clear-cut the very forests his grandfather had once promised to replant. We were fundamentally incompatible, yet I had spent a decade ignoring the friction because I believed my stability could somehow cure his insecurity. Turning onto my street, the old-growth fir trees formed a dense canopy overhead. My house sat at the end of a private drive, a modern structure of glass and reclaimed cedar. I bought it 7 years ago. I paid cash. Preston loved hosting political fundraisers on the back terrace, standing beside the infinity pool, gesturing to the architecture as if he had drawn the blueprints himself. I never interrupted those performances. I let him play the self-made tycoon. I parked the sedan in the garage, killed the engine, and stepped into the quiet house. The silence greeted me not as an empty void, but as a welcoming embrace. No one was demanding a wire transfer. No one was asking me to review a vendor contract for a party I was not invited to. I kicked off my damp heels, the cool slate floor grounding me. Walking into the kitchen, I bypassed the digital espresso machine and opened the climate-controlled wine fridge. I reached for a bottle of Pinot Noir from a boutique vineyard in the Dundee Hills. The vineyard was one of my firm's early beta testers for automated hydration sensors. They gifted me a case every harvest to express their gratitude. It felt appropriate to open a bottle today, a testament to real partnerships built on mutual value rather than parasitic extraction. I pulled a crystal glass from the cabinet, uncorked the bottle, and poured a generous measure. The ruby liquid caught the dim light of the pendant fixtures above the granite island. I took a slow sip. The complex notes of dark cherry and damp earth coated my palate. Then my phone vibrated against the stone countertop. The digital clock on the oven read 4:20. Exactly 40 minutes had passed since Preston blocked my path at the botanical garden. The wedding ceremony would be concluding. The guests would be transitioning from the glass conservatory to the grand ballroom for the reception. This was the precise moment the venue coordinators, the caterers, and the entertainment would finalize their open invoices. The phone vibrated again, then a third time. A rhythmic pulsing began shattering the tranquil silence of my kitchen. I did not pick up the device. I leaned against the counter, swirling the wine in my glass, watching the screen illuminate with incoming notifications. The first message was not from Preston. It was an automated alert from the Platinum Card provider. A charge for $12,000 from Pacific Northwest Event Catering had been declined. 10 seconds later, a second alert appeared. A charge for $4,500 from Portland Elite Strings had been declined. The digital arteries had officially clamped shut. The financial life support was unplugged. A minute passed before Preston sent his first text. "Did you do something to the primary checking account?" I took another sip of Pinot Noir. The taste was exceptional. Another text arrived. "My card just bounced at the venue office. Call the bank right now and clear the fraud alert." He still believed it was a technical error. His arrogance prevented him from comprehending that the woman he deemed an embarrassment possessed the spine to actually cut him off. He assumed I was sitting somewhere nursing a bruised ego, waiting for his permission to rejoin the family. He assumed my compliance was a permanent condition. 3 minutes later, the reality of his situation began to fracture his polished exterior. The text messages shifted from annoyed commands to frantic demands. "Cynthia, answer your phone. The venue manager is standing in front of me. They are trying to run the secondary cards and they are all locked." I watched the words scroll across the lock screen. I could picture the scene with vivid clarity. Preston, still wearing his immaculate charcoal tuxedo, standing in a cramped venue office. The wedding planner holding a tablet looking at him with a mixture of pity and impatience. the realization dawning on the venue staff that the wealthy timber heir might not actually have the funds to pay for the imported orchids and the dry-aged steak dinners. The phone rang. Preston's portrait flashed on the screen. The photograph showed him smiling on a yacht in Seattle, a trip I had financed the previous summer. I let it ring. The sound echoed through the high ceilings of my home, a frantic, desperate noise that slowly faded into a missed call notification. Another text immediately replaced it. What is going on with the accounts? The caterer is threatening to leave. The guests are entering the ballroom. Fix this right now. I set my wine glass down. I looked at the words. Fix this right now. Not a single apology for his behavior. Not a single inquiry about my well-being. Even in his moment of public humiliation, I was nothing more than a utility meant to repair his problems. For years, I had feared this exact scenario. I had spent countless sleepless nights worrying about a missed payment, a bounced check, or a public scandal that might tarnish the family name. I had contorted myself into impossible shapes to ensure their comfort, believing that their happiness secured my place in the world. Standing in the quiet sanctuary of my kitchen, watching the panic unfold in tiny digital bubbles, I realized the fear was gone. The heavy, suffocating burden of carrying ungrateful people simply vanished. I felt light. I felt a profound, unshakable peace. I did not type a response. I did not send a single character. Silence is often the most devastating answer you can provide to a person who thrives on controlling the narrative. The caterer threatening to leave was just the beginning. Lucille had demanded a premium open bar featuring top-tier spirits and vintage champagnes. Those vendors required a final card swipe before pulling the corks. Without my authorization, the bar would remain shuttered. The string quartet would pack their instruments into their velvet-lined cases and walk out the service doors. The carefully curated illusion of the Portland timber elite was collapsing in real time, exposing the hollow, bankrupt reality beneath it. My phone buzzed again this time, from Lucille. Cynthia, Preston is having an issue with the bank. Call him immediately. This is Natalie's special day. Do not be selfish. I smiled. The audacity was almost impressive. She barred me from witnessing the special day, yet expected me to fund every second of it. I turned the phone over, placing it face down on the cool granite. Let them deal with the caterer. Let them explain to 200 high society guests why the champagne was not flowing. They had asked for my absence. I was simply honoring their request in its entirety. However, the flurry of declined charges sparked a new, pragmatic thought. The speed at which Preston panicked suggested he had zero liquidity of his own. None. For a man running a supposedly prestigious lobbying firm in the state capital, he should have possessed the personal capital to cover a venue invoice in an emergency. The fact that he was entirely dependent on my specific credit lines indicated a severe deficit in his own ledgers. I thought back to the thick envelope from the predatory equity firm. I thought about his frequent extended legislative trips to Seattle and San Francisco trips that never seemed to yield any favorable policies or new contracts. If my discretionary accounts were funding his family's social events, what exactly were his business accounts funding? I picked up my glass and walked out of the kitchen, heading down the hallway toward my home office. The room overlooked the back terrace, the space dominated by a large mahogany desk and dual monitors. I needed to see the full picture. Not just the wedding expenses, but the comprehensive architecture of our shared finances over the past 2 years. I sat in my leather chair, tapped the keyboard, and woke the screens. I opened the secure portal for our primary joint banking institution. I typed in my credentials, my fingers moving with practiced speed. I pressed enter, ready to download the transaction histories. The screen flashed white, then loaded a dialog box featuring red, unyielding text. Error. Invalid credentials. Please contact your administrator. I stopped. I blinked, my heart skipping a single distinct beat. I retyped the password, assuming a simple keystroke mistake. Error. Invalid credentials. Account access revoked. The quiet peace in my chest vanished, replaced by a sharp, icy spike of adrenaline. Preston was not just a panicked host at a wedding. He was an active threat. And the real war had just begun. Error. Invalid credentials. Account access revoked. I stared at the glowing pixels on my monitor, the red text searing itself into my retinas. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me, banishing the initial shock. Preston was not just reacting to the frozen wedding accounts. He was retaliating. While I sat in my kitchen, savoring a glass of Pinot Noir, my husband had stepped away from the chaos of his sister's ruined reception, logged into our primary joint banking portal, and changed the administrative passwords. The discretionary trusts I froze earlier were only the branches of our financial tree. The primary joint operating accounts were the trunk. If he gained uncontested digital control over those, he could drain millions in liquid capital before Monday morning. I did not waste time calling him. You do not negotiate with a thief while his hand is still inside your vault. I grabbed my car keys and my encrypted security fob, leaving the half-empty wine glass on the granite island. The rain had intensified, drumming a frantic rhythm against the roof of the garage as I slid back into the driver's seat of my sedan. I bypassed the local suburban bank branch. Retail banks closed at noon on Saturdays, and a standard teller could not override a Premier account lockout anyway. I needed root access. I needed my private wealth management office in the Pearl District. I dialed Gideon through the car interface as I sped toward Interstate 5. The tires hissed over the slick asphalt, kicking up a mist of dirty water. "Gideon," I said the moment the line connected, "meet me at the downtown tower." "I am already at my desk," he replied, his tone laced with professional urgency. "The automated fraud protocols flagged a suspicious routing request 5 minutes ago. Someone attempted to wire $700,000 from your shared operational fund to an external corporate ledger." "Did the wire clear?" I asked, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "No," Gideon said. "The system placed it in a holding queue because the destination account lacked prior authentication history. But the user is currently initiating manual overrides." "Lock the entire portfolio," I commanded, merging onto the highway, with aggressive precision. "Suspend the routing numbers, terminate all digital access tokens. I want the accounts frozen at the institutional level. Nobody moves a single cent until I am physically standing in your office." "Consider it done," he said, and the line went dead. The drive into downtown Portland took 22 minutes. The cityscape emerged through the rain, a grid of steel and glass reflecting the gray sky. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the financial tower, swiped my security badge, and took the private elevator directly to the 14th floor. Gideon was waiting in the glass-walled conference room. He had a stack of thick, legal-sized paper resting on the mahogany table. The digital displays mounted on the wall showed our portfolio dashboards, all bordered in flashing yellow indicators, denoting the administrative freeze. He did not offer small talk. He slid the stack of paper across the table. I bypassed the front-end portal and pulled the raw transaction logs for the past 24 months, Gideon said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. The $700,000 wire was stopped. The principal capital is secure. "But Cynthia, you need to look at the historical data. There is a pattern of capital flight." I sat down the leather chair, sighing under my weight. I turned my attention to the printed ledgers. I am a woman who built an empire by interpreting data. I read soil saturation reports and crop yield projections the way other people read novels. Numbers tell a story devoid of emotion or bias. The story these numbers told was a breathtaking betrayal. Preston always maintained that his lobbying firm, Cascade Public Affairs, was a highly lucrative enterprise. He claimed his connections in the state legislature generated steady consulting fees from the timber industry. The ledgers told the truth. His firm was a hollow shell, drowning in operational debt. To keep the lights on and maintain his image among the old money elite, Preston had been quietly siphoning funds from our joint accounts. The transfers were disguised as generic consulting invoices, legal retainers, and tax equity disbursements. He funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars over 2 years to cover his failing business. He stole my money to pretend he was my equal. But the theft was not the worst part. The true devastation lay in where the money traveled after it entered his corporate accounts. I traced a series of recurring high-dollar transfers. $50,000 here, $75,000 there. They all routed to a single external entity, a political action committee named Oregon Heritage Forestry. The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The air in the conference room grew thin. Oregon Heritage Forestry was the primary opposition group lobbying against the Willamette Water Conservation Act. The Conservation Act was a landmark piece of legislation my company had spent 3 years drafting. If passed, it would mandate the exact sustainable farming technology my firm provided, securing our market dominance and protecting the regional watersheds. The timber barons hated the bill. They viewed it as unnecessary regulation driven by new money tech outsiders. They had been pouring resources into a vicious smear campaign to kill the legislation on the Senate floor. I stared at the routing numbers, the black ink blurring for a fraction of a second. My husband was funding them. Preston was using my capital to finance the destruction of my life's work. He was paying for the attack ads, the opposition research, and the corrupted legislative votes. To appease his mother and secure his standing among the wealthy families who despised my origins, he had actively weaponized my own fortune against me. He was trying to bankrupt my legacy to save his fragile pride. Gideon remained silent, watching my eyes track across the pages. He saw the exact moment the realization took root. "Do you want me to contact the legal department?" Gideon asked softly. "Not yet," I replied, my voice stripped of all warmth. I opened my laptop and connected a secure external drive. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously logging every fraudulent transfer, every disguised invoice, and every political donation. I built a master spreadsheet cross-referencing the dates of the stolen funds with the dates of the opposition campaign's media buys. The correlation was undeniable. I was forging the weapon I would use to dismantle his life, column by column, row by row. I consolidated the evidence into a single encrypted file. I printed a duplicate set of the ledgers, placed them in a leather portfolio, and stood up. The raw grief of the betrayal had already burned away, leaving behind a cold, crystalline resolve. "Thank you, Gideon," I said, walking toward the glass doors. "Keep the institutional freeze in place. Decline every inquiry." I rode the elevator down to the parking garage. The storm had broken while I was inside, leaving a heavy, damp fog rolling off the Willamette River. The drive back to Lake Oswego passed in a blur of focused calculation. The game had changed. This was no longer a simple divorce over social disrespect. This was corporate espionage and financial fraud. I pulled into my private driveway. The house was dark, save for the ambient glow of the landscape lighting cutting through the fog. I walked inside, placing the leather portfolio on the kitchen island, right next to my abandoned glass of Pinot Noir. I stood in the silence of my home, waiting. 10 minutes later, the heavy mechanical groan of the garage door motor vibrated through the floorboards. The sound echoed in the quiet house, signaling the arrival of the man who thought he could steal my future. I turned toward the hallway, watching the handle of the interior door begin to turn. The confrontation was no longer impending. It was here. The heavy front door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the antique mirror hanging in the foyer. Footsteps, hard and unyielding, echoed down the hardwood hallway. I remained seated at the granite island, the leather portfolio resting squarely in front of me. The ambient light from the under-cabinet fixtures cast long shadows across the kitchen. Preston rounded the corner. He looked disheveled in a way I had never seen. The immaculate charcoal tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, the silk bow tie yanked loose and hanging unevenly around his collar. His face was flushed, a blotchy crimson that traveled up from his neck. The polished, charming lobbyist was gone. In his place stood a man stripped of his primary defense mechanism, his money. Or rather, my money. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded. His voice was a loud, jagged weapon designed to consume the oxygen in the room. He did not walk, he paced. He moved with aggressive, territorial strides, attempting to physically dominate the space. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he shouted, gesturing wildly. The venue manager threatened to call the police. I had to beg the event coordinator to hold the invoices until Monday. My sister was crying in the bridal suite. My mother had to cancel the premium bar service in front of 200 guests. You humiliated me. You humiliated this entire family. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his volume. I watched his performance with the detached observation of a scientist studying a volatile reaction. "I was not present to humiliate anyone," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "You made certain of that." He stopped pacing and slammed his hands down on the edge of the kitchen island, leaning forward so his face was inches from mine. "This is not about the wedding. This is about you having a psychological break. You locked the operating accounts. You froze the trusts. You called Gideon and initiated an institutional lockdown like a paranoid lunatic. Reverse it. Right now." He expected me to recoil. He expected me to retreat into defense, to apologize for overstepping, to scramble for his forgiveness. He expected the farm girl from the Willamette Valley to defer to the timber baron. Instead, I slid the leather portfolio across the smooth granite surface. It stopped directly beneath his hands. "I am not experiencing a psychological break, Preston. I am experiencing clarity." He stared at the portfolio, a flicker of genuine apprehension momentarily replacing the rage in his eyes. He opened the cover. The printed ledgers sat inside, the fraudulent transfers highlighted in meticulous detail. The payments to Cascade Public Affairs. The routed wires to Oregon Heritage Forestry. His eyes scanned the pages. The blotchy crimson on his neck began to recede, replaced by a pale, sickly pallor. The loud, jagged weapon of his voice vanished. The shift was immediate and terrifying. His anger morphed seamlessly into his most dangerous asset: manipulation. "Cynthia," he said, his voice suddenly dropping an octave, becoming smooth and entirely reasonable. "You are misinterpreting this data." I did not blink. "I am reading bank routing numbers, Preston. They do not require interpretation." He closed the portfolio and sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked at me with a practiced expression of deep paternal concern. "You have been working 80-hour weeks for 6 months straight," he said softly. "The stress of the Conservation Act is blinding you. We discussed these transfers. These were short-term business loans to cover operational shortfalls at my firm. You agreed to them." "I never agreed to finance a failing lobbying firm," I replied. "And I certainly never agreed to fund a political action committee actively working to destroy my legislation." He shook his head, offering a condescending smile. "Your hormones must be fluctuating again, or you are just completely exhausted. We talked about Oregon Heritage Forestry. I told you I needed to make strategic donations to opposition groups to maintain my access within the Conservative caucus. It was a tactical maneuver to protect your interests in the long run. You simply forgot the conversation because you are overworked." The audacity of his gaslighting was almost structural in its perfection. He was attempting to rewrite reality, utilizing my gender and my work ethic as the foundation for his lies. He wanted me to doubt my own memory, my own sanity, before I doubted his integrity. I remained perfectly still. I did not take the emotional bait. I did not argue about hypothetical conversations that never occurred. I focused entirely on the concrete reality resting on the island between us. "You called me an embarrassment to appease your mother," I said quietly. The words hung in the air, a final, unalterable truth. He opened his mouth to deploy another excuse, but I cut him off. "You locked me out of the banking portal while you were standing at your sister's ruined reception. You attempted to wire $700,000 to an external corporate ledger. You failed because I'm faster than you. You failed because I am the only reason your family is not bankrupt." The smooth, reasonable facade cracked. The paternal concern evaporated. He realized, perhaps for the first time in 14 years, that he could not charm his way out of the consequence. He could not outsmart the woman who engineered the algorithms that built their lifestyle. When the charm fails, the weak resort to terror. Preston straightened up, buttoning his tuxedo jacket with slow, deliberate precision. He looked down at me, his eyes cold and devoid of any shared history. "If you proceed with this delusion," he warned, his voice a low, vibrating threat, "if you refuse to unlock those accounts, I will ensure you regret it." I tilted my head, waiting. "I know every political donor, every regulatory commissioner, and every major investor in this state," he continued. "I sit on the board of 3 regional commerce committees. If you try to cut me off, I will burn your reputation to the ground. I will tell the entire Portland business community that the CEO of the Willamette Valley's golden tech firm is mentally unstable. I will tell them you are erratic, paranoid, and incapable of managing your own assets. Your board of directors will remove you before the next fiscal quarter ends. You will lose everything you built." The threat was not empty. Oregon's business community was notoriously tight-knit. A whisper campaign orchestrated by a connected timber lobbyist could inflict catastrophic damage on an agricultural technology firm dependent on legislative goodwill. He possessed the network to spread the poison, and he possessed the malice to execute the plan. He waited for my reaction. He wanted to see fear. He wanted to see the farm girl panic at the prospect of losing her empire. I picked up my wine glass. I took a final sip of the Pinot Noir. I set the empty crystal down next to the leather portfolio. I simply nodded. The lines were drawn. The initial skirmish was over, and the psychological warfare had officially commenced. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, retreating to the guest suite. The house remained silent, but the quiet was no longer peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating stillness that precedes a devastating storm. I knew he would not wait for Monday to launch his attack. The smear campaign would begin before sunrise. The dawn arrived devoid of sunlight. A thick, oppressive fog rolled off the Willamette River, wrapping my Lake Oswego property in a suffocating gray shroud. I had not slept a single minute. I spent the dark hours sitting in the ergonomic chair of my home office, watching the digital clock on my monitor tick toward morning. Preston remained barricaded inside the guest suite down the hall. He made no sound. He did not emerge to apologize. He was likely doing exactly what I was doing, calculating his next maneuver. At 7:15, the heavy silence broke. My mobile device vibrated against the mahogany desk. The caller identification displayed the name Charles Montgomery. Charles was the lead partner at the venture capital firm that anchored our Series B funding round 3 years ago. He held a critical seat on my board of directors. He was a pragmatic financier who valued stability above all else. He did not make social calls on Sunday mornings. I cleared my throat, ensuring my voice carried no trace of exhaustion, and answered the call. "Good morning, Charles," I said, projecting a calm and measured authority. "Cynthia," he replied, His tone was hesitant, thick with an uncomfortable caution that immediately set my nerves on edge. I apologize for calling so early on a weekend. I received a rather disturbing phone call late last night. I sat up straighter. My pulse accelerated a rhythmic thud against my ribs. Who called you? Preston reached out to me around midnight, Charles said. He sounded distraught. He asked for my discretion, but given my fiduciary duties to the firm, I felt obligated to speak with you directly. A sharp, icy needle of pure panic pierced my sternum. I gripped the edge of the desk. The psychological warfare Preston promised the night before was already underway. He had bypassed my personal circle and aimed directly for the throat of my professional empire. What did my husband discuss with you? I asked. Charles exhaled a long breath. He expressed deep concern for your well-being. He claimed you are suffering from a severe nervous breakdown. He utilized phrases like hormonal imbalance and extreme exhaustion. He told me you suffered a paranoid episode yesterday afternoon and began erratically locking him out of joint operational accounts without provocation. He suggested you are acting recklessly with capital, and he wanted to warn the board before your condition impacted company assets. The sheer audacity of his strategy stole the breath from my lungs. Preston was attempting to orchestrate a boardroom coup. He knew he could not defeat me with financial data, so he weaponized my gender and my age. He was painting me as a hysterical, erratic woman losing her grip on reality due to the pressures of running a technology firm. In the male-dominated agricultural sector, that specific narrative is a lethal poison. If the board lost confidence in my stability, they could vote to suspend me as chief executive officer before the next fiscal quarter. My knuckles turned white against the dark wood of my desk. I spent 2 decades fighting for a seat at the table. I proved my worth in muddy fields testing soil sensors and in sterile boardrooms defending revenue projections. I built a resilient, sustainable future. Now the man who slept beside me for 14 years was attempting to erase my credibility with a few whispered, sympathetic phone calls. I did not scream. I did not defend myself with frantic denials. Denial implies a need to be believed. I did not need Charles to believe me. I needed him to look at the math. I appreciate your transparency, Charles, I said, my voice dropping into a register of frigid, unyielding command. Please contact the rest of the executive board. Schedule an emergency virtual summit for 10 o'clock this morning. Cynthia, is everything secure? He asked, his caution deepening. Everything is under my direct control, I stated. You will have a comprehensive update at 10. Do not speak to Preston again. I terminated the connection before he could ask another question. I had 2 hours. I contacted Gideon. I requested the verified digital copies of the fraudulent ledgers, the intercepted wire transfers, and the specific political action committee routing numbers. I compiled a presentation. This was not going to be a defense of my mental health. This was going to be a corporate execution. At precisely 10 o'clock, I initiated the video conference. 5 distinct faces appeared on my secondary monitor. The key investors and executive directors of my firm. Their expressions ranged from worried to skeptical. The poison Preston planted overnight was clearly circulating. I did not offer pleasantries. I shared my primary screen, replacing my video feed with a stark, undeniable spreadsheet. Thank you for gathering on short notice, I began. I am aware that a narrative is being circulated regarding my mental fitness and my asset management. We will not waste time discussing my personal life. We will discuss corporate security. I highlighted the first column of data. Yesterday afternoon, I initiated a hard institutional freeze on several personal and joint financial accounts, I explained. This was not a paranoid episode. It was a calculated security measure to halt an active embezzlement scheme. The skepticism on their faces wavered, replaced by sharp, focused attention. I navigated to the intercepted wire transfer. My husband attempted to move $700,000 from our joint operational fund into a failing lobbying entity. When I audited the historical data, I discovered a long-term pattern of capital flight. He has been systematically siphoning funds for 2 years. Charles leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Cynthia, while marital theft is tragic, it is a personal legal matter. Why involve the corporate board? Because of where the stolen capital was routed, I replied. I brought up the final slide. The glaring, undeniable routing numbers connecting Preston to Oregon Heritage Forestry. For the past 24 months, my husband has been utilizing my personal wealth to quietly finance the primary political opposition group lobbying against the Willamette Water Conservation Act. He is funding the smear campaigns, the opposition research, and the dark money advertisements designed to kill our flagship legislation. He is actively attempting to cripple this company to protect his standing within the legacy timber industry. The silence in the virtual boardroom was profound. It was a heavy, tangible quiet. These board members were pragmatic predators. They cared deeply about their investments, their profit margins, and their market dominance. They did not care about Preston and his fragile ego. When they saw the undeniable proof that he was a direct, active threat to their bottom line, their loyalty to me crystallized into an impenetrable armor. Charles was the first to speak. His voice carried a cold, dangerous edge. "Are the company ledgers secure?" he asked. "I isolated my corporate equity years ago," I confirmed. "He has zero access to firm capital. However, he is weaponizing his proximity to me. He is contacting you to destroy my reputation because he knows I have severed his funding." The board moved with swift, ruthless efficiency. Within 15 minutes, they authorized our corporate legal counsel to issue an immediate cease and desist order against Preston. They threatened him with a ruinous civil lawsuit for tortious interference if he contacted another investor or spoke a single disparaging word about my leadership. Charles offered a brief, quiet apology before logging off. "We stand by you, Cynthia," he said. "Extinguish this threat." The conference ended. My monitors faded to black. I sat back in my chair, exhaling a long, trembling breath. The professional fortress held. I had neutralized his smear campaign by exposing him to the sunlight of objective truth. The minor conflict of professional doubt was resolved. I closed the laptop. A fleeting sense of victory washed over me, a brief respite from the relentless tension. I had outmaneuvered him on the battlefield he chose. Then, my mobile device rang again. It was Holden. He was the aggressive, highly recommended divorce litigator I retained via email at 2 a.m. I expected a standard introductory call to discuss filing timelines and asset separation. I answered the phone, ready to outline my strategy. "Cynthia," Holden said. His voice was tight, lacking the polished, relaxed cadence I expected from a high-priced attorney. "Yes, Holden, I am ready to begin the filing process," I said. "We need to delay the standard divorce filing," he replied abruptly. "I spent the morning pulling the municipal property records for the Cannon Beach estate. The $8.8 million property you purchased through your holding company." My stomach tightened. "What is wrong with the property records?" Holden paused the silence, stretching taut across the cellular connection. "We need to meet in my office, now. Preston did not just embezzle your cash. He utilized the property to secure a private line of credit." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I placed the house in a blind corporate holding company," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "A traditional bank would never approve a loan without my explicit signature as the managing director." "He did not use a traditional bank," Holden said grimly. "He used a high-risk private equity firm in Chicago. And he did not need your permission, Cynthia, because he forged your signature on the deed of trust." The room spun. The victory of the board meeting evaporated instantly. This was no longer a simple marital dissolution. It was a potential federal crime. And my name was on the fraudulent documents. Holden's office was a study in aggressive minimalism. Located on the 32nd floor of a steel and glass high-rise in downtown Portland, the space featured stark white walls, a polished concrete floor, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. There were no comfortable armchairs or soothing landscapes on the walls. It was an environment designed for people fighting wars, not seeking therapy. I sat across from him at a massive slab of reclaimed walnut that served as his desk. Holden was a litigator whose reputation preceded him. He was known for being ruthless, clinical, and completely devoid of sentimentality. He did not care about the emotional collapse of a 14-year marriage. He cared about leverage, asset protection, and destroying the opposition. That was exactly why I hired him. "You are certain he could not have obtained a conventional loan?" I asked, my voice steady despite the nausea rolling through my stomach. Holden tapped a silver pen against a thick stack of legal documents resting between us. "Absolute certainty, Cynthia. The Cannon Beach property is titled to Pacific Horizon Holdings, a blind limited liability company where you are listed as the sole managing director. A commercial bank would require extensive underwriting board resolutions and your physical notarized signature on multiple security instruments to originate a mortgage." He slid the top document across the desk toward me. It was a copy of a deed of trust retrieved from the county recorder's office that morning. Preston bypassed the regulated banking system entirely. Holden continued, his tone flat and professional. He went to a private equity firm in Chicago, a group that specializes in high-yield distressed debt and political financing. They operate in the shadow banking sector, where due diligence is often sacrificed for exorbitant interest rates. I recognized the name of the firm printed at the top of the document. It was the same logo I had seen embossed on the heavy envelope Preston snatched from the kitchen counter 3 weeks ago. The envelope he claimed was just political fundraising trash. "They approved a $3 million revolving line of credit," Holden stated, pointing to a specific paragraph. "And they secured that debt utilizing the Cannon Beach estate as collateral." I stared at the page. The letters seemed to vibrate slightly. "If he defaults on this loan," I whispered, "the private equity firm takes the house." Holden nodded. "Correct. They initiate foreclosure proceedings against Pacific Horizon Holdings, and you lose an $8.8 million asset you purchased entirely with your own capital." The scope of his betrayal expanded, swallowing the remaining oxygen in the room. Preston had not just stolen cash from our joint accounts, he had actively jeopardized the largest single real estate asset in my portfolio to fund the political destruction of my company. He was gambling with my money to finance my ruin. But how I demanded, my hands clenching into fists in my lap. How did a shadow lender accept the property as collateral without my authorization? I am the sole managing director of the holding company. Holden flipped to the final page of the document. He turned it so it faced me directly. "Look at the signature block." There, scrawled in black ink, was my name. Cynthia Cunningham, Managing Director, Pacific Horizon Holdings. The signature was a very good approximation. It captured the sharp loops and the aggressive slant I utilized on corporate contracts. But it was not mine. I knew every document I signed. I kept meticulous digital records of every authorization I executed. I had never seen this piece of paper before this exact moment. "He forged it," I said. The words tasted like ash. "My husband committed felony forgery." Holden leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Yes, he committed federal wire fraud by transmitting the fraudulent documents across state lines to the Chicago firm, and he committed state-level forgery by filing the falsified deed of trust in Oregon." The narrative had fundamentally shifted. Yesterday, I was a woman navigating a bitter, high-stakes divorce, fighting to protect my business from a smear campaign. Today, I was a potential co-conspirator in a federal financial crime. If the private equity firm discovered the fraud, or if Preston defaulted and they attempted to seize the property, I would be dragged into the ensuing criminal investigation. I would have to prove I was the victim of the forgery, not an active participant in securing an illegal loan. I cannot lose my company over this, I said, my voice dropping an octave, solidifying into absolute resolve. I built that firm from the ground up. I will not let his criminal arrogance destroy it. We have to report this immediately. I want to contact the authorities. I want him arrested. Holden raised a hand, palm outward, a sharp gesture demanding silence. No, he commanded. We do not contact the authorities yet. I bristled, anger flaring hot in my chest. Why not? He forged my signature on a multi-million-dollar financial instrument. Because right now we only have a suspicion and a very good forgery, Holden explained, his tone clinical and detached. Preston is a seasoned political operative. If we accuse him prematurely, he will claim you authorized the loan and simply forgot, or he will claim one of his assistants handled the paperwork and made a catastrophic error. He will muddy the waters. He will utilize his connections to drag the investigation out for years. During that time, the private equity firm will still hold the lien on your property, and your corporate board will panic at the sight of a federal inquiry. Holden leaned forward, resting his forearms on the walnut desk. If you strike a king, Cynthia, you must sever the head completely. We cannot wound him. We must annihilate him. What is the strategy? I asked, forcing the anger down, replacing it with cold calculation. Strategic silence, Holden replied. We proceed with the standard divorce filings. We focus entirely on the marital assets, the joint accounts, and the separation agreements. We give him the illusion that you are only concerned with the civil dissolution of the marriage. We let him believe he got away with the forgery. He wants me to play a terrifying game of cat and mouse. Exactly, Holden confirmed. Criminals who believe they have successfully evaded detection always become careless. They relax their protocols. They make additional verifiable mistakes. We need him to incriminate himself further. We need to secure undeniable digital proof that he physically generated that document and transmitted it to Chicago. I thought about the man currently barricaded in the guest suite of my home. The man who had called me an embarrassment, who had tried to lock me out of my own accounts, who had attempted to orchestrate a boardroom coup. I was going to have to return to that house and pretend I only knew half the truth. I was going to have to look him in the eye and negotiate a divorce settlement while secretly building a federal criminal case against him. The psychological toll would be immense. But the alternative was losing everything I had built. How do we secure the proof? I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the internal turmoil. Holden offered a brief, predatory smile. We need access to his primary digital ecosystem, his personal computer, his encrypted hard drives, his server logs. We cannot request them through standard legal discovery because he will destroy the evidence the moment he receives the subpoena. We have to acquire the data covertly. I understand, I said, standing up from the chair. I will handle the acquisition. Holden remained seated, watching me closely. Be very careful, Cynthia. Do not provoke him. Do not alert him to your true intentions. If he realizes what you are doing, the situation will become exponentially more dangerous. I walked toward the heavy glass door of his office. Preston thinks I am an overworked, emotionally unstable woman, currently reeling from a social rejection, I said, looking back over my shoulder. He relies on that narrative. I am going to use his own arrogance to destroy him. I left the high-rise and stepped out onto the busy Portland street. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflecting the gray sky. I had a new objective. I needed to infiltrate his digital fortress, and I needed to do it without him suspecting a single thing. The minor conflict of the smear campaign was over. The true war for my survival had begun, and the first casualty was going to be the illusion of my compliance. Returning to Lake Oswego after my chilling meeting with Holden required a profound mental shift. I parked my sedan in the garage, took a deep, steadying breath, and unlocked the interior door. I had to shed the impenetrable armor of a targeted chief executive officer and wear the delicate skin of a fractured, exhausted wife. Preston was sitting in the living room, a crystal glass of bourbon resting on his knee. He had clearly realized his attempt to unseat me via my corporate board had faltered. Charles had likely sent him a terse, undeniable legal warning from our corporate counsel. Preston needed a new strategy to corral me, a new method to regain control of the narrative. He stood up as I entered, adopting a posture of weary surrender. "Cynthia," he said, his tone dripping with manufactured empathy. "We cannot keep living like this. The tension is destroying our foundation." I lowered my gaze, letting my shoulders slump forward. I channeled every ounce of genuine fatigue I possessed into that single physical movement. "I am tired, Preston." "I know," he murmured, taking a slow step closer. "You are carrying too heavy a burden. The technology firm, the legislative deadlines, the complex finances. It is fracturing your perspective. I booked us an emergency appointment with Dr. Ayers Thorne tomorrow afternoon, a couples counselor. We need a neutral space to communicate before this spiral becomes a permanent condition." A therapist. He wanted a captive audience to validate his fiction of my mental decline. He wanted a licensed medical professional to document my supposed paranoia. It was a calculated, insidious maneuver designed to protect his assets in a future divorce proceeding. It was also the greatest tactical gift he could have handed me. Tomorrow afternoon, I repeated, allowing my voice to become a hollow echo. "1 hour," Preston urged softly, his eyes tracking my micro-expressions. "Just 60 minutes, Cynthia. Let me help you find your center again." "Okay," I whispered, offering a fragile, hesitant nod. "We will go." He smiled. It was a brief, triumphant curve of his lips that he quickly disguised as profound relief. He believed he had successfully pushed me back into compliance. He believed the threat of losing my business had terrified me into submission. The moment he retreated to the guest suite, I sent a secure, encrypted text to Gideon. I required a digital forensic specialist. Within an hour, Gideon connected me with Nolan, a former corporate cybersecurity contractor who now handled discrete data recovery for high-net-worth clients. I did not meet Nolan in a coffee shop or a public park. We coordinated over a shielded video link. I need root access to a custom-built desktop tower running a dual encrypted operating system, I explained to Nolan, providing the exact hardware specifications of Preston's home office setup. "The machine is located in my private residence in Lake Oswego. I can bypass the local firewalls and clone the physical drives," Nolan replied. His voice was a distorted digital hum over the secure line. "But I cannot do it remotely. I need direct physical access to the hardware. The cloning process for a terabyte of encrypted storage requires roughly 45 minutes. You will have exactly 60 minutes, I confirmed. Tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon, the house will be empty. I will leave the exterior security system disarmed and the side door unlocked." "Understood," Nolan said. "I extract the data, leave no digital footprint, and vanish." The trap was primed. Dr. Thorne's office was situated in a restored Victorian house in the Nob Hill district, a neighborhood characterized by ancient oak trees and quiet generational wealth. The interior smelled faintly of chamomile tea and expensive leather upholstery. Preston and I sat on a beige linen sofa, positioned just far enough apart to signify deep marital distress. Dr. Thorne, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair and perceptive eyes, held a yellow legal pad. She began the session with standard clinical inquiries about our communication patterns and recent stressors. Preston delivered a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together in a gesture of raw vulnerability. "I am terrified for her," Dr. Thorne Preston said. His voice broke at the precise optimal moment. Cynthia is a brilliant woman. She built an incredible company from nothing, but the stress is eroding her reality. She has started inventing these elaborate conspiracies, accusing me of sabotaging her business. Yesterday, she froze our shared bank accounts and locked me out of the digital financial portals. He paused, glancing at me, with a look of manufactured sorrow. I just want my wife back. I want her to feel safe again. If I had not seen the forged deed of trust bearing my name, if I had not tracked the routing numbers directly to the opposition lobbying group, his performance might have convinced me. He sounded so rational, so deeply burdened by my imaginary illness. He was weaving a tapestry of lies so intricate the therapist was visibly leaning into his narrative, her pen moving rapidly across the yellow paper. I played my part flawlessly. I looked down at my hands, rubbing my temples as if fighting off a severe blinding migraine. I let my voice tremble just a fraction, projecting the image of a woman stretched beyond her limits. The pressure is relentless, I admitted, staring at the intricate patterns of the Persian rug beneath my feet. The legislative deadlines, the supply chain logistics for the censors. Sometimes it feels like the ground is shifting beneath me. When Preston tried to move the funds, I panicked. I reacted without thinking clearly. Preston exhaled a long, audible breath of relief. He reached across the sofa and placed his hand over mine. His skin felt like dry, cold paper. I forced my muscles to relax, refusing to pull away from his touch. "We can fix this, Cynthia," he murmured. "I want to trust you," I whispered back. The therapist nodded, tapping her pen against the notepad. "This is a significant breakthrough," Dr. Thorne said. "Acknowledging the role of stress in your reactions, Cynthia, is the first step toward rebuilding mutual trust. Preston is demonstrating a clear willingness to support you through this demanding season." I watched the antique pendulum clock on the wall. The brass second hand swept past the 12. 2:35. Back in Lake Oswego, Nolan was currently sitting in Preston's leather office chair. A physical decryption key was plugged into the desktop tower, silently copying every email, every hidden ledger, and every digital signature my husband had ever drafted. My pulse hummed in my ears, a steady drumbeat counting down the minutes. The remainder of the hour involved Dr. Thorne outlining a framework for de-escalation. Preston eagerly agreed to every clinical suggestion, playing the role of the devoted patient saint. He promised to be more transparent with his political consulting, a lie that tasted bitter even to hear. I promised to consult him before making unilateral financial decisions. It was a grotesque pantomime of a healthy marriage. At 3:00, the session concluded. We walked out of the restored Victorian house and stepped onto the damp Portland sidewalk. The rain had paused, leaving the air crisp and smelling of wet pavement. We had driven separately, maintaining the illusion of our current separation. Preston walked me to my sedan. He looked lighter buoyant, with the arrogance of a man who believed he had just outsmarted his greatest adversary. He thought he had secured a permanent medical record of my instability, neutralizing any future claims I might make about his financial theft. "I am proud of you," Preston said, placing a hand on the roof of my car. "That took real courage today. We are going to get through this." My phone, resting inside my leather purse, vibrated a single sharp pulse. It was the prearranged signal from Nolan. The data acquisition was successful. The drive was cloned. The digital trail of the forged signature and the illegal lobbying payouts was now securely in my possession. The ghost in his machine had captured everything. I looked up at Preston. I let a warm, trusting smile spread across my face. I looked directly into his eyes, matching his false sincerity with my own weaponized compliance. "I feel better," I said, my voice soft and reassuring. I think we really can work on things, Preston. His smile widened into a smug, victorious grin. I will see you at home, he replied, turning to walk toward his luxury sport utility vehicle. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan. The warm smile vanished the instant the heavy door clicked shut. My features settled back into a mask of cold, unyielding resolve. I possessed the smoking gun. The elaborate house of cards he built to protect his timber dynasty was resting on a foundation of gasoline, and I held the match. I started the engine, preparing to call Holden and review the extracted data. But before I could shift the car into drive, the digital dashboard display lit up with an incoming call. The caller identification read, Lucille. My mother-in-law had not spoken to me since I was barred from the botanical garden. Her sudden intrusion into the timeline signaled a shift in the battlefield. Preston might have believed the crisis was managed, but Lucille operated on a separate frequency of supreme entitlement. I pressed the answer button, bracing for the next collision on this twisting road. The brief artificial peace of the therapy session was over, and the true pressure was about to build. The digital display on my dashboard glowed with the incoming call. Lucille, the matriarch of the Timber Dynasty, a woman who possessed the remarkable ability to edit reality in real time, erasing any event that did not serve her immediate social ambitions. She had not spoken a word to me since her son barred me from the botanical garden. She had not called to apologize for her daughter's ruined reception or the declined credit cards. She was calling now because she required something. She required the one thing she despised me for possessing: capital. I stared at the blinking green accept button. A normal person would have ignored the call. A wounded spouse would have answered and unleashed a torrent of righteous anger. I did neither. I was no longer a wounded spouse. I was an architect drafting a demolition blueprint. I tapped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. Lucille did not offer a greeting. She bypassed the standard pleasantries and launched directly into her agenda, her voice carrying the clipped, authoritative cadence of a woman accustomed to blind obedience. Cynthia. She began the tone, implying I had somehow inconvenienced her by making her dial my number. I have been trying to reach the event coordinators at the Cannon Beach property all morning. They are telling me the primary accounts are still experiencing a banking error. You need to call your wealth manager and correct this oversight immediately. The invitations for the housewarming gala went out 3 weeks ago. I sat in the quiet cabin of my sedan, listening to the sheer, breathtaking entitlement radiating through the speaker. She called it a banking error. She willfully ignored the fact that I had intentionally frozen the trusts to stop her son from draining my fortune. She glossed over the public humiliation I endured at her daughter's wedding. In Lucille's mind, my feelings were irrelevant. My function was to facilitate her lifestyle. The housewarming gala, I repeated, keeping my voice neutral, devoid of any inflection. Yes, Lucille snapped, her impatience bleeding through the polished veneer. The Coastal Showcase. I have the governor's chief of staff attending. I have 3 state senators and the entire board of the Portland Arts Endowment arriving on Saturday evening. The catering company requires the final deposit cleared by tomorrow morning, or they will release the date. I cannot have my social standing jeopardized because your banking interface is malfunctioning. She was throwing a 6-figure party in a house I purchased to impress people who viewed me as a blue-collar interloper. She was planning to stand in the grand foyer of an $8.8 million estate, sipping champagne paid for by my agricultural technology firm, and claim the entire achievement as a triumph of her family lineage. I considered the situation. I could tell her the truth. I could inform her that Preston had forged my signature to secure a fraudulent private equity loan against the property. I could tell her the house did not belong to her son, but to a blind corporate holding company I controlled, and that she was merely a month-to-month tenant. I could end the facade right there, in the driver's seat of my car. But ending it over a cellular connection lacked tactical efficiency. It would give them time to scramble. It would give Preston time to craft a counter-narrative, to call his political donors, and spin a story of a vindictive wife trying to ruin his mother's golden years. The timing is difficult, I said, injecting a note of hesitant reluctance into my voice. Preston and I are currently evaluating our financial structures. We just left a couples counseling session. Things are tense. Releasing a large sum of discretionary capital right now might complicate our reconciliation. The hesitation was the bait. Lucille took it instantly, her impatience transforming into venomous contempt. "Let us be very clear, Cynthia," she said, her voice dropping into a cold, elitist sneer. "You are punishing my son because you do not know how to fit in with our kind of people. You have always harbored this pathetic, working-class resentment toward our family. Preston told me you had a hysterical episode and locked the accounts out of pure spite. You are trying to sabotage his legacy because you lack the pedigree to understand it. Open the accounts. Do not make me remind you who you married." I closed my eyes. The cruelty was so precise, so deeply ingrained in her worldview. She truly believed her inherited timber name elevated her above the woman who actually earned the wealth sustaining her existence. She believed I was a functional utility, a peasant permitted to walk among the nobility as long as I continued to pay the toll. I opened my eyes. A cold, brilliant strategy illuminated my mind. Lucia wanted a stage. She wanted a grand, opulent showcase filled with the most influential politicians, lobbyists, and old money socialites in the Pacific Northwest. She wanted to gather the exact audience Preston relied upon to maintain his fraudulent career. She wanted to put her entire hollow empire on display. I decided to let her build the stage. I decided to let her invite the audience. Because a demolition is always more effective when the building is full. "You are right, Lucille," I said, allowing my voice to sound appropriately chastised. "I apologize. The stress of the business has clouded my judgment. I will call Gideon right now. I will authorize a temporary lift on the specific credit lines associated with the Cannon Beach event coordinators and the catering vendors. The party will proceed exactly as you planned." A smug, victorious sigh echoed through the phone. "See that you do," she commanded. "And Cynthia, I expect you to remain in Lake Oswego this weekend. This gala is a delicate networking environment for Preston. We cannot afford any more of your dramatic episodes." "I will not disrupt your evening," I promised. She terminated the connection. I lowered the phone, a slow, predatory smile touching the corners of my mouth. The dramatic irony was almost poetic. Lucille believed she had just bullied a farm girl into submission. She believed she had secured the crowning social achievement of her twilight years. She had no idea she was actively planning funding and inviting guests to her own public eviction. I dialed Holden immediately. The litigator answered on the first ring, his tone sharp and ready for the next maneuver. "We have a shift in the timeline," I told him, shifting the car into drive and pulling away from the Nob Hill district. "Preston's mother is hosting a grand housewarming gala at the Cannon Beach property this Saturday. The entire political and social elite of Oregon will be in attendance." Holden remained silent for a moment, processing the tactical landscape. "That presents a unique opportunity," he mused. "It presents the perfect execution ground," I corrected him. "I have the cloned hard drive from Preston's home office. My data extraction specialist secured the digital footprint of the forged deed, the shadow banking communications, and the illicit wire transfers to the opposition lobbying group. The evidence is secured. I no longer need to play the dutiful recovering wife." "Excellent," Holden said, the satisfaction evident in his clipped syllables. "What are your instructions?" "I want the civil dissolution filings finalized," I instructed, merging onto the highway and pointing the sedan toward home. "I want the formal civil lawsuit for financial fraud and corporate sabotage drafted, and I want a binding, irrefutable, 30-day eviction notice drawn up for the Cannon Beach property, naming Lucille as the defaulting tenant." You want to serve them simultaneously? Holden asked. I want to serve them at the gala, I confirmed. I want the process servers disguised as catering staff. I want the documents handed to Preston and Lucille in the middle of their grand foyer, surrounded by every political donor and timber baron they have spent the last 14 years trying to impress. They wanted to exclude me from their society. I am going to obliterate their standing within it. Consider the paperwork drafted, Holden replied. The element of surprise will be unassailable. They will have nowhere to hide the fallout. We ended the call. The rain began to fall again, streaking across the windshield, but my vision had never been clearer. The sprawling coastal mansion purchased to buy peace was about to become the site of my ultimate liberation. But before Saturday arrived, I had one final vulnerability to secure. Preston was a desperate man, and desperate men invariably seek out weak points when they sense a shift in the wind. My daughter Paige worked part-time at my firm, and Preston had legally adopted her when she was 8 years old. He possessed a paternal connection he could easily weaponize. If I was going to burn his empire to the ground, I had to ensure my daughter was not standing inside it when the match was struck. The storm over Lake Oswego had finally broken by Thursday evening, leaving behind a damp and heavy stillness that pressed against the glass of my living room windows. I stood by the kitchen island, tracing the rim of a porcelain teacup, waiting. The digital clock on the stove shifted to 7:15. Headlights swept across the wet driveway, casting long, distorted shadows through the sheer curtains. My pulse quickened, a rapid thud echoing in my ears. The impending battle with Preston over corporate assets and forged deeds was a calculated war of attrition. I knew how to fight that war. I possessed the data, the legal counsel, and the strategic high ground, but the vehicle pulling up to my house carried a vulnerability no spreadsheet could protect. My daughter Paige turned off her car engine. She was 22 years old, navigating her senior year at a local university while working part-time in a logistics division of my agricultural technology firm. She shared my drive, my analytical mind, and my deep reverence for the Oregon soil. But she also shared a 14-year history with Preston. I had a previous relationship that ended long before my company became an empire. When Preston and I married, Paige was 8. He legally adopted her. He attended her soccer games, taught her how to drive on the winding logging roads, and played the role of the devoted father with flawless execution. I heard her key turn in the front door. The lock clicked. If Preston sensed the walls closing in, he would inevitably seek out a human shield. He would attempt to secure Paige's loyalty, to isolate me, turning my own flesh and blood into a weapon of emotional leverage. Paige stepped into the foyer, shrugging off a damp raincoat. She looked exhausted. Dark circles underscored her eyes, and her shoulders carried a rigid tension that spoke volumes before she even uttered a single syllable. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice lacking its usual vibrant warmth. I poured a second cup of tea, guiding it across the granite counter toward her. "I am glad you came over," I replied, keeping my tone gentle. She did not reach for the cup. She remained standing near the edge of the kitchen, creating a physical distance that felt like a canyon. She folded her arms across her chest, a defensive posture, indicating she had arrived heavily armed with someone else's narrative. "Dad came to my apartment this afternoon," Paige stated. The words hung in the quiet room. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, fortifying my composure. "What did he tell you?" Her jaw tightened. "He told me you are suffering from a severe psychological episode. He said the stress of the new conservation legislation finally broke you. He sat on my sofa and cried, Mom. He told me you froze all the family accounts out of pure paranoia that you are trying to ruin Grandma, and that you locked him out of his own life because you think everyone is plotting against you." A cold, visceral terror gripped my chest. It was a suffocating fear far more potent than any threat to my business. Preston was actively poisoning my child. He was utilizing his manufactured tears to manipulate a young woman who still viewed him as her protector. He asked me to help him, Paige continued, her voice wavering. He wants me to speak to your board of directors. He wants me to tell them you are acting erratically so they can mandate a medical leave of absence before you destroy the company. The sheer depravity of his scheme revealed itself in full. He could not convince Charles and the executive board on his own, so he planned to parade my own daughter in front of them as a star witness to my supposed insanity. I looked at Paige. Her eyes were searching my face, desperate for reassurance, yet clouded with the doubt Preston had meticulously planted. If I raised my voice, if I launched into a frantic defense, I would only validate his portrayal of my instability. Demanding her loyalty would force her into a corner, making her choose between two parents she loved. I refused to play his game on his terms. I would not command her allegiance. I would offer her the brutal, unfiltered reality. I set my teacup down. I did not say a word. I walked past her, heading down the hallway toward my home office. I unlocked the floor safe hidden beneath the oak desk and retrieved the encrypted laptop containing the cloned hard drive data Nolan had extracted. I carried the machine back to the kitchen and placed it on the island between us. I opened the lid, the screen glowing against the dim ambient light. I typed in the decryption sequence. I opened the master file labeled Cascade Public Affairs. I love you, Paige, I said, my voice quiet and steady. I will never place you in the middle of a marital dispute. I will never ask you to choose a side based on my emotional demands. She stared at the laptop, apprehension warring with curiosity in her expression. What is this? I stepped back, creating space, allowing her to approach the screen on her own accord. I will not tell you what to think, I told her. I will only show you what is true. Paige slowly walked forward. She rested her hands on the edge of the granite counter and looked at the digital ledgers. Open the folder marked Opposition Routing, I instructed gently. Her fingers trembled slightly as she operated the trackpad. She opened the folder. The screen populated with dozens of bank transfer receipts, email correspondences, and internal memos drafted by Preston. Paige worked in my firm. She understood our financial architecture and our political hurdles better than anyone outside the executive suite. It took her less than 30 seconds to comprehend what she was looking at. These are wire transfers from your joint operating fund, she whispered, her brow furrowing. Why is Dad sending capital to Oregon Heritage Forestry? Keep reading the attached emails, I suggested, softly. She clicked on a message Preston had sent to the director of the opposition lobbying group. She read the words aloud, her voice fracturing. Enclosed is the second installment for the media buy. We need to frame the Willamette Water Conservation Act as a radical job killer. Ensure the digital ads target the rural districts by Tuesday. She stopped reading. The silence in the kitchen grew dense. The realization struck her with physical force. She pressed a hand over her mouth. He is funding the attack campaigns against our own company? Paige gasped, looking up at me, her eyes wide with shock. He is paying them to destroy the legislation I helped draft last summer. He has been doing it for 2 years, I confirmed. He used my money to finance the destruction of our life's work, all to appease the legacy timber families who resent our innovation. Paige looked back at the screen, her breathing shallow and rapid. Her innocence, the foundational belief that her father was a man of integrity, was crumbling in real time. It was an agonizing process to witness, but a necessary amputation. Close that folder and open the one labeled Real Estate Securities, I said, guiding her toward the final devastating blow. She clicked the trackpad. A high-resolution scan of the Cannon Beach deed of trust filled the monitor. I explained the blind corporate holding company. I explained that I purchased the coastal estate entirely with my own capital to provide Lucille a legacy home. Then I pointed to the signature block on the digital document. He used the property to secure a $3 million loan from a predatory shadow lender in Chicago, I told her, keeping my tone objective and clinical. He needed the cash infusion to cover his failing lobbying firm and to escalate the attacks against our company. Paige leaned closer to the screen, examining the black ink. But, Mom, this is your signature. No, I replied, standing beside her. It is an excellent imitation. He committed felony wire fraud and state-level forgery to secure that capital. If he defaults on the loan, the Chicago firm seizes the property and I become implicated in a federal financial crime. Tears finally breached the corners of her eyes, spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. She backed away from the laptop, wrapping her arms around her own torso, as if trying to hold herself together. The man who taught her how to drive. The man who sat on her sofa 3 hours ago, weeping about my mental health, was a fraud, an embezzler, and a criminal. I closed the distance between us and pulled her into my arms. She buried her face in my shoulder, shaking with silent, racking sobs. I held my daughter tightly, resting my chin against her hair, letting her mourn the death of the father she thought she knew. Preston had calculated every angle, but he failed to account for the intellect of the woman he raised. He thought he could manipulate her with cheap theatrics, forgetting that she possessed the same analytical rigor that built my empire. We stood there for a long time. When her tears finally subsided, Paige pulled back. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. The profound sorrow in her eyes was rapidly hardening into something else. The raw, formidable anger of a woman who realizes she has been used as a pawn. She looked at the encrypted laptop, then looked directly at me. "He is not just throwing a party for Grandma this Saturday," Paige said, her voice gaining a sharp, dangerous edge. I frowned, caught off guard by the sudden pivot. "What do you mean? When he was at my apartment today, he was frantic about the catering deposit." She explained, her words flowing with sudden urgency. "He said the Cannon Beach Gala had to proceed perfectly. He invited the local news affiliates, the regional political reporters, and the top conservative donors in the state." I felt a sudden shift in the tactical landscape. A housewarming gala does not require political reporters. Why would he invite the press? Because it is an announcement Paige revealed, delivering the final, catastrophic puzzle piece. He is launching a political campaign. He is announcing his candidacy for the state senate on Saturday night. He needs the mansion, the coastal backdrop, and the display of immense wealth to prove his viability to the party leadership. He is using your house to buy a seat in the legislature. The magnitude of his ambition hit me like a physical shockwave. He did not just want to destroy my company. He wanted to climb over the wreckage and secure a position of legislative power, utilizing my stolen assets to fund his ascension. I looked at the dark windows, visualizing the opulent coastal estate and the trap I had already set in motion. The stakes of Saturday night had just multiplied exponentially. I was no longer merely evicting a toxic mother-in-law and serving divorce papers. I was walking into the launch of a political empire, and I was going to burn it to the ground before he ever reached the podium. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of dramatic coastal weather that Oregon is famous for. I stood in the master closet of my Lake Oswego home, staring at the rows of designer garments I rarely wore. For 14 years, I had curated a wardrobe of muted colors and sensible cuts. Cardigans, tailored slacks, unassuming flats. I dressed to fade into the background, intentionally dimming my own light so Preston could cast a larger shadow. He was the charismatic timber heir, destined for political greatness. I was just the agrarian tech nerd who paid the bills. If I wore a striking gown, he complained it was too flashy, too new money. He preferred me invisible. Today, invisibility was no longer on the agenda. I bypassed the neutral tones and reached for a tailored floor-length emerald silk gown. The color mirrored the dense evergreen forests of the Pacific Northwest, a silent tribute to the real wealth of this state, the wealth I protected while he tried to exploit it. I paired it with the diamond drop earrings I had purchased for myself after my company secured its first major municipal contract. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe twist. When I looked in the full-length mirror, the woman staring back was a stranger to the Timber dynasty. She was not a compliant wife. She was a corporate executioner. I grabbed my clutch, containing the legal documents Holden had couriered to my house that morning, and walked out to the garage. I chose the heavy luxury sedan, a formidable piece of German engineering, and pointed it west toward the Pacific Ocean. The drive through the coastal mountain range took 90 minutes. The dense canopy of ancient Douglas firs created a tunnel of shadows, the winding asphalt slick with a fresh layer of mist. As I navigated the hairpin turns, my mind replayed the revelation Paige had delivered 2 days ago. Preston was launching a campaign for the state senate tonight. He was utilizing my stolen capital to gather the most influential political donors in the region under one roof. He planned to stand on the sweeping staircase of a coastal estate he did not own, flanked by a mother who was legally a month-to-month tenant, and declare himself the savior of Oregon conservative legacy. The sheer scale of his delusion was almost magnificent. He believed the world was a stage built solely for his performance. He failed to realize I owned the theater, and I was about to cut the power to his microphone. The coastal fog grew thick as I approached Cannon Beach. The smell of salt and crushed pine needles filled the cabin air. The estate sat on a dramatic bluff overlooking the churning gray expanse of the Pacific. Even from a mile away, the mansion glowed like a beacon of excessive wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows poured warm amber light out into the encroaching twilight. I turned onto the private drive. The logistics of the event were staggering. A team of valets in crisp white shirts scrambled to accommodate the steady stream of arriving guests. The circular driveway was already choked with black sport utility vehicles featuring government license plates, alongside sleek European sports cars belonging to regional industry titans. The political elite of the Pacific Northwest had arrived to anoint their new champion. I handed my keys to a young valet. He glanced at my emerald gown, his eyes widening slightly before he handed me a claim ticket. I did not take the cardboard square. "I will not be staying long," I told him, my voice carrying over the sound of the crashing surf below the cliffs. I turned and faced the heavy mahogany double doors. 2 private security guards flanked the entrance, checking names against an illuminated tablet. They were not the same guards from the botanical garden. I approached the podium. "Name, please," the taller guard asked, looking down at his screen. "Cynthia Cunningham," I stated clearly. He scrolled through the digital list, his brow furrowed. "I apologize, ma'am. I do not see a Cunningham on the approved registry." I did not raise my voice. I did not display a single ounce of frustration. I reached into my clutch and extracted a single sheet of heavy bond paper. It was not an invitation. It was a certified copy of the property deed, listing Pacific Horizon Holdings as the sole owner, and a secondary document establishing my identity as the sole managing director of that corporate entity. "I suggest you review the ownership records of this estate," I said, sliding the papers across the podium. "You are currently providing security from my private residence. I do not require an invitation to enter my own home." The guard read the documents. His posture stiffened. The professional authority he projected vanished, replaced by acute uncertainty. He looked at his partner, then back at me. He stepped aside, opening one of the heavy mahogany doors. I walked into the grand foyer. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted prime rib. A classical string ensemble played softly from a raised balcony. The room was packed with at least 200 guests, a sea of tailored suits and designer evening wear. Waiters navigated the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with champagne flutes and artisanal appetizers. At the far end of the room, standing near a towering stone fireplace, was Preston. He was holding court, gesturing animatedly to a circle of men I recognized as prominent conservative lobbyists and a former state governor. Lucille was stationed near the sweeping staircase, draped in a silver gown, greeting guests with the regal condescension of a monarch holding a royal reception. I took 5 measured steps into the room. The shift in the atmosphere was not instantaneous, but it was inevitable. The guests nearest the entrance noticed me first. The conversation in their immediate vicinity faltered. A ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. I was not a stranger to the Portland business community. Many of the executives in this room had sat across negotiating tables from me. They knew who I was, and they knew I had been conspicuously absent from the Timber family recent social engagements. The silence spread outward like a drop of ink in a glass of water. The murmuring voices died away. Even the string ensemble on the balcony seemed to lower their volume, sensing the sudden drop in barometric pressure within the room. Lucille turned her head, her gaze tracking the direction of the silence. When her eyes locked onto me, the color drained from her face. The regal monarch vanished. The tight, venomous rage I remembered from our telephone call warped her features. She abandoned her position by the staircase and marched directly toward me, her silver gown sweeping fiercely across the marble floor. Before she could close the distance, Preston realized what was happening. He broke away from his circle of political donors. Panic, raw and unfiltered, flashed across his face. He moved with alarming speed, intercepting me just as Lucille reached my position. He did not offer a greeting. He did not attempt to mask his hostility for the benefit of his guests. He reached out and wrapped his hand around my upper arm. His grip was entirely devoid of affection. It was a harsh, punitive restraint, mirroring the exact physical intimidation he utilized at the Botanical Garden 30 days ago. His fingers dug into the silk of my gown. He leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. "Get out before you embarrass yourself," he whispered, his voice vibrating with a desperate, threatening intensity. "You are ruining my announcement. Leave this house right now, Cynthia." The room was profoundly quiet. 200 pairs of eyes were fixed upon us, watching the charismatic candidate harshly handling his wife in the center of a gala. The tension in the grand foyer was a living, breathing entity, thick enough to suffocate everyone present. I did not struggle against his grip. I did not flinch. I turned my head slowly, looking directly into his panicked, furious eyes. The time for silent sacrifices and strategic compliance was over. The stage was built, the audience was waiting, and the demolition was finally authorized. His fingers dug into the emerald silk covering my upper arm. The pressure was intense, a punitive squeeze designed to inflict compliance through physical discomfort. For years, a gesture like that would have triggered my internal de-escalation protocols. I would have lowered my eyes, softened my voice, and allowed him to usher me away into a quiet corridor to preserve his public dignity. I would have prioritized his reputation over my own physical autonomy. Tonight, the protocols were permanently rewritten. I did not flinch. I did not attempt to wrench myself away, which would have signaled panic. Instead, I turned my head and looked down at his hand. I stared at his white knuckles, tracing the tense tendons beneath his skin. Then I looked up into his frantic, desperate eyes. I planted my heels firmly against the polished marble floor of the grand foyer. With a slow, deliberate motion, I pulled my arm backward. The movement was unyielding. The sheer resolve in my posture forced his grip to break. His fingers slipped off the silk fabric, leaving him reaching at empty air. "I think there is a profound misunderstanding taking place tonight," I said. I did not shout. I did not need to raise my volume. The architectural design of the coastal estate featured a soaring, vaulted ceiling that carried sound with pristine acoustic clarity. My voice cut through the heavy, suffocating silence, reaching the furthest corners of the room. I ensured every state senator, every wealthy donor, and every corporate lobbyist heard the precise cadence of my words. I took one step forward, placing myself directly in the center of the gathering, forcing the audience to focus their undivided attention on the space between my husband and me. "There's a severe misunderstanding," I continued, my tone ringing with crystalline authority, "about whose home this actually is." Preston realized the polite, private exit was no longer an option. The meticulously crafted facade of his political launch was fracturing in front of his most critical audience. He needed to deploy immediate damage control. He fell back on the single strategy that had sustained his ego for the past 30 days. He pivoted toward the crowd, forcing a bright, hollow laugh that echoed uncomfortably against the stone fireplace. "Please forgive the interruption," everyone Preston announced, projecting his voice to mimic the polished cadence of a seasoned statesman addressing a minor technical difficulty. "My wife is experiencing a severe medical episode. She has been under immense psychological strain at her technology firm, and unfortunately, her exhaustion has manifested in some troubling paranoia." He offered the room a sympathetic, sorrowful smile, playing the role of the burdened, devoted caretaker. He gestured toward the governor's chief of staff, a man holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. "We are currently navigating some difficult transitions," Preston added, lowering his head in a display of manufactured humility. "I ask for your grace and your privacy while I escort her back to Lake Oswego to rest." It was a brilliant performance. It was a flawless execution of political theater. A few guests near the front exchanged pitying glances. A prominent real estate developer whispered something to his spouse, shaking his head in feigned sympathy. Preston believed he had successfully neutralized the threat. He believed the crowd would dismiss anything I said as the ravings of a fractured mind. He stepped toward me again, extending his hand, playing the benevolent savior. "Come on, sweetheart," he murmured, the threat lingering just beneath the sweet syllables. "Let us get you home." I did not look at him. I maintained my focus on the sea of faces watching us. I raised my right hand, lifting 2 fingers into the air. From the periphery of the catered affair, near the entrance to the industrial kitchen, a man stepped out of the shadows. He wore a crisp white uniform, identical to the staff circulating with trays of artisanal appetizers. However, he was not carrying hors d'oeuvres. He walked with a determined, focused stride, navigating through the parted crowd until he reached the center of the foyer. He stepped directly between Preston and me. Reaching into the interior pocket of his tailored uniform jacket, he produced 2 thick, heavy manila envelopes. He handed the first envelope to Preston. He turned and handed the second envelope to Lucille, who was standing paralyzed near the bottom of the sweeping staircase. "You have been served," the man stated in a flat, clinical voice. The process server did not linger. His duty fulfilled, he turned and vanished back into the bewildered crowd, leaving the envelopes resting like live munitions in their hands. Preston stared at the yellow paper. The sympathetic, burdened caretaker vanished. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. Lucille held her envelope by the very edge, her hands trembling so fiercely the paper rattled against her diamond bracelets. "Since my husband enjoys discussing our private transitions with his valued colleagues," I said, addressing the stunned room, "I believe it is only fair to provide the full context of his latest political campaign." I clasped my hands in front of me. I felt the immense, towering strength of the truth anchoring me to the marble floor. "My mother-in-law frequently refers to this coastal estate as her legacy home," I explained, gesturing toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark, churning Pacific Ocean. She told many of you that her successful son purchased it to celebrate their heritage. That is a fabricated narrative. Lucille opened her mouth to speak, but the sheer shock rendered her voiceless. When the purchase of this property was finalized, I continued ensuring my diction was flawless. The transaction was routed through a blind corporate entity named Pacific Horizon Holdings. I am the sole managing director of that corporation. I utilized my own personal capital to fund the acquisition. Preston does not own this land. Lucille does not own this structure. She resides here on a month-to-month residential lease, subject to standard eviction protocols. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the gathering. The wealthy elite's people who understood the ruthless mechanics of real estate and asset protection instantly recognized the devastating reality of my statement. The Grand Timber dynasty was residing in a borrowed castle. Preston gripped his envelope, the paper crinkling under the pressure of his tightening fist. "Shut your mouth," he hissed, the political polish entirely stripped away, revealing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. I ignored his command. The final, fatal strike remained. 3 days before my sister-in-law walked down the aisle, I told the silent, captivated audience I transferred $8.8 million to clear a massive financial hurdle regarding this property. I was told the money was required to settle decades of accrued back taxes owed by the timber estate. I paused, letting the sum hang in the air. $8.8 million. It was a figure that commanded respect, even in a room filled with multimillionaires. That was another lie I revealed, my voice dropping into a register of frigid, unyielding judgment. The funds were not remitted to the Internal Revenue Service. The funds were required to clear a secret, unauthorized lien. I turned my head and looked directly into Preston's eyes. I watched the realization dawn on him. I watched him comprehend that the ghost in his machine had successfully extracted his darkest secret. My husband bypassed the regulated banking sector, I announced to his political donors. He utilized a shadow lender in Chicago. He secured a massive line of credit to finance his failing lobbying firm and fund an illicit opposition campaign against my technology company. To secure that capital, he submitted a fraudulent deed of trust. He forged my signature to pledge a property he did not own. The silence in the grand foyer shattered. Whispers erupted across the room, a chaotic symphony of shock, disgust, and rapid recalculation. Forgery, wire fraud, shadow banking. These were not mere marital grievances. These were career-ending federal offenses. The prominent state senator standing near the fireplace set his crystal tumbler down on a side table with a sharp, definitive clink. "Open the envelopes, Preston," I commanded, my voice slicing through the rising murmurs of the crowd. His hands shook uncontrollably as he tore the sealed flap. He pulled the thick stack of legal documents out into the ambient light of the chandelier. "The first document is a formal dissolution of marriage," I stated, narrating the destruction of his life for the benefit of his audience. "The second document is a notice of a civil lawsuit filed this morning in the county courthouse, detailing financial fraud, corporate sabotage, and the deliberate embezzlement of shared assets." I turned my attention to Lucille. She was staring at the papers in her own hand, tears of supreme humiliation spilling over her heavily powdered cheeks. "And the document in your possession, Lucille," I said softly, delivering the final, fatal consequence of her entitlement, "is a formal, binding 30-day notice of eviction. Your lease is terminated. You have 1 month to vacate my property." The tension in the room reached a boiling point. The carefully constructed illusion of the Oregon timber elite lay in ruins on the marble floor. The stage was set for the exodus, and the true cost of their arrogance was about to be collected in full. The silence that descended upon the grand foyer was absolute, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed the remaining air from the room. 200 pairs of eyes remained fixed on the center of the floor, witnessing the total, catastrophic collapse of a political launch. The carefully cultivated illusion of the Oregon timber elite was shattered, replaced by the ugly, undeniable reality of federal fraud and eviction. Preston stood paralyzed, his hands trembling as he stared at the legal documents resting in his palm. The polished, charismatic lobbyist was gone. The man who had confidently grabbed my arm minutes ago was replaced by a cornered animal. Eyes darting wildly across the crowd, searching for a sympathetic face. He found none. Oregon's political and business elite are pragmatic predators. They value loyalty, but they value their own reputations far more. Association with a man accused of wire fraud and forgery was a toxic liability. The prominent state senator, a man Preston had heavily courted for an endorsement, did not offer a word of comfort. He simply set his crystal tumbler down on a side table. The sharp clink of glass against marble was the starting pistol for the exodus. The senator turned on his heel and walked toward the heavy mahogany doors, his aides quickly falling into step behind him. He did not look back. The dam broke. The murmurs that had been rippling through the crowd suddenly amplified into a chaotic symphony of rapid recalculation. Guests began moving toward the exit in a steady, determined stream. The wealthy donors, the corporate lobbyists, and the high society fixtures rapidly distanced themselves from the sinking ship. The great timber dynasty was imploding, and no one wanted to be caught in the blast radius. Preston realized he was losing his audience. Panic, raw and unadulterated, seized him. "Wait!" he shouted, his voice cracking, entirely devoid of its usual measured authority. "This is a misunderstanding. She is lying. This is a paranoid delusion. She is having a psychological break. I can explain all of this." He lunged toward a retreating real estate developer, grabbing the man's arm. The developer yanked his arm free with visible disgust, stepping back as if Preston was contagious. "Let go of me, Preston," the developer said, his voice cold and unforgiving. "Deal with your federal indictment. Do not drag my firm into this mess." The developer joined the mass exodus, disappearing into the coastal night. The grand foyer, designed to showcase power and influence, was rapidly emptying, leaving behind a profound sense of desolation. Lucille finally broke the paralysis that had gripped her since the process server handed her the eviction notice. She stared at the yellow paper, the reality of her impending homelessness colliding with her supreme entitlement. She collapsed onto the bottom step of the sweeping staircase, burying her face in her hands. Loud, dramatic sobs echoed through the cavernous space. "My house!" she wailed, her voice thick with genuine despair. "You cannot take my home. I am hosting the Portland Arts Endowment next month. You are ruining my life!" Her tears were not born of remorse for her son's crimes or regret for the cruelty she had inflicted upon me. She was mourning the loss of her social standing. She was weeping for the illusion she had spent a lifetime defending. Preston spun back toward me. The panic in his eyes hardened into a vicious, cornered rage. The charm was entirely stripped away, revealing the true depth of his malice. "You set me up!" he screamed, his face contorted in fury. "You planned this! You let me invite everyone here just to humiliate me! You manipulated the accounts! You framed me for the forgery! I will destroy your company for this! I will take everything you built!" His threats echoed against the vaulted ceiling, hollow and pathetic. He was a man screaming into a void entirely disconnected from the reality of his own actions. He still believed he was the victim of my insubordination, rather than the architect of his own destruction. I did not raise my voice. I did not match his frantic energy. I remained the calm, immovable center of the storm he had created. "I did not set you up, Preston," I replied, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the remnants of his pathetic defense. "I simply stopped paying for your lies." The simplicity of the truth struck him with physical force. He staggered back, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for a counterattack that did not exist. The ghost in his machine had captured the evidence. The process servers had delivered the consequences. The audience had rendered their verdict. The war was over. I looked at the man I had married 14 years ago. The man I had believed was my partner, my equal. I felt a profound sense of detachment, as if I was observing a stranger standing in the wreckage of a life that no longer belonged to me. The heavy burden of carrying him, of financing his ego, was permanently lifted. I turned my attention to Lucille, who was still sobbing on the staircase, clutching the eviction notice like a lifeline. "You have 30 days, Lucille," I stated, ensuring my diction was flawless. "The lease is terminated. Any personal property remaining on the premises after 30 days will be considered abandoned and removed by a commercial liquidation firm. I suggest you begin packing." I did not wait for a response. I did not need validation or apologies. I turned my back on the collapsing timber dynasty and walked toward the mahogany doors. The remaining guests parted, creating a wide path from my exit. They watched me with a mixture of awe and apprehension, recognizing the absolute, uncompromising power of a woman who had reclaimed her own narrative. I stepped out into the damp, salty air of the Oregon coast. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear, star-filled sky. The rhythmic crash of the Pacific Ocean against the cliffs below provided a fitting soundtrack to my liberation. The valet brought my heavy luxury sedan around to the circular driveway. He opened the door, his eyes lowered respectfully. I slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of leather grounding me in the present moment. I started the engine, the powerful motor humming to life. As I drove away from the $8.8 million coastal estate, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The warm amber light still poured from the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the chaotic scene unfolding within. Preston was shouting into his phone, desperately trying to contact an attorney who would take his call. Lucille was still weeping on the staircase. The grand housewarming gala, intended to launch a political empire, had become a public execution. The methodical, quiet delivery of my vengeance was far more devastating than any screaming match could ever be. I had not destroyed their lives. I had simply forced them to live in the reality they created without my capital to shield them from the consequences. The drive back to Lake Oswego was not a retreat. It was a triumphant return. The illusion was shattered, and the future was entirely mine to build. The transition from the adrenaline-fueled chaos of a public execution to the sterile reality of the legal system is a jarring experience. Vengeance, when delivered in a grand foyer filled with stunned onlookers, feels cinematic. The aftermath does not. The aftermath smells of stale coffee, fresh printer toner, and the polished walnut of a conference table. It operates on docket numbers, timestamps, and cold, unyielding procedure. On Monday morning, I sat across from Holden in his downtown high-rise office. The storm clouds over Portland had cleared, allowing a pale, thin sunlight to filter through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below moved with its usual steady rhythm, entirely unaware that a prominent timber dynasty was currently experiencing a fatal structural collapse. Holden reviewed a stack of manila folders, his silver pen tapping a rhythmic cadence against the glass desk. "The civil lawsuit is filed," he stated, his tone devoid of any celebratory warmth. "The asset freeze is permanent, but the most interesting development occurred less than an hour ago. It concerns the private equity firm in Chicago." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool glass. "Did they initiate foreclosure proceedings on the coastal property?" "No," Holden replied, a rare, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. "The Chicago firm is a subsidiary holding company. It manages high-yield debt for a select group of ultra-high net worth individuals. The primary stakeholder, the silent partner, who controls that specific lending portfolio, is a woman named Vivian Kensington." The name resonated instantly. Vivian Kensington was a cornerstone of the Pacific Northwest social elite. She was a philanthropist, a formidable political donor, and most notably, she was Lucille's most prized social connection. Vivian sat on the board of the Portland Arts Endowment. She was one of the 200 guests standing in the grand foyer on Saturday night. Holden steepled his fingers. When you announced that your husband bypassed the regulated banking sector to secure a fraudulent loan using a forged deed, Vivian realized the timeline aligned perfectly with a recent highly irregular disbursement from her Chicago subsidiary. She spent Sunday morning conducting an internal audit of her own investment portfolios. She discovered Preston defrauded her specific fund. I said, the sheer poetic justice of the situation crystallizing in my mind. Holden nodded. Vivian does not tolerate theft, and she certainly does not tolerate being utilized as an unwitting pawn in a political launch. She did not bother calling your husband to demand repayment. She unleashed her corporate attorneys and contacted the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She handed them the forged deed, the wire transfers, and the shadow banking communications. Preston had sought to elevate his standing among the elite by stealing from me. Instead, he had inadvertently stolen from the very apex of the society he worshipped. He had handed the sword of his own destruction directly to the woman his mother spent a decade trying to impress. The consequences arrived with ruthless, devastating speed. By Wednesday, the local business journals published the preliminary details of the federal inquiry. The article did not need to exaggerate the facts. The truth was damning enough. Cascade Public Affairs, the lobbying firm Preston utilized to project his influence, collapsed overnight. In the realm of state politics, influence is the only currency that matters. Once a federal investigation opens, that influence turns into a contagious, lethal disease. His clients severed their retainers immediately. The downtown office space was vacated. The dark money opposition campaign against my water conservation legislation, suddenly starved of my stolen capital, imploded within a week. The attack advertisements ceased. The opposition researchers vanished. Without his funding, the legacy timber lobbyists lost their unified front. The Willamette Water Conservation Act moved out of committee and passed the state Senate with a bipartisan majority. My technology firm did not just survive his sabotage. We secured 3 new municipal contracts within the month our market dominance solidified by the very legislation he tried to kill. The business boomed, unhindered by the hidden financial drain that had burdened my ledgers for years. While Preston navigated the terrifying reality of federal indictments and grand jury subpoenas, Lucille faced a different kind of reckoning. The 30-day eviction notice ticked down with unmerciful precision. She spent the first week calling her society friends, seeking a benefactor, a temporary guest house, or even a sympathetic ear. The phone calls went to voicemail. The text messages remained unread. She learned the harshest lesson of the elite social strata. Their loyalty is inextricably tethered to proximity to power. When the power evaporates, the friendship ceases to exist. On the 30th day, Lucille vacated the Cannon Beach estate. She did not hire a premium moving service. She could not afford one. She relied on a discount freight company to transport her remaining personal effects to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Gresham, a suburban district far removed from the historic architecture and manicured lawns she prized above her own family. I did not attend the eviction. I received a brief email from the property manager confirming the keys were surrendered and the premises were secure. There is a common misconception that revenge provides a continuous, euphoric celebration. It does not. True justice is quiet. It is the profound relief of a heavy burden permanently removed. It is the absence of a localized pain you had grown so accustomed to carrying, you forgot what it felt like to walk upright. I did not gloat. I did not drive past her new apartment building to observe her reduced circumstances. I simply deleted the property manager's email and went back to work. The dissolution of my 14-year marriage concluded with surprising brevity. Preston possessed zero leverage. He was facing significant federal prison time for wire fraud and forgery. His criminal defense attorney advised him to liquidate any remaining civil battles to demonstrate cooperation and minimize his eventual sentencing guidelines. He signed the divorce settlement without requesting a single marital asset. He forfeited any claim to the Lake Oswego house, the investment portfolios, and the corporate equity. He sat across from me in a neutral mediation room, wearing a cheap off-the-rack suit. The charismatic timber air was entirely erased, replaced by a hollow, defeated man awaiting his prison designation. We did not exchange a single word. The ink dried, the judge signed the decree, and he became a ghost in my history. A month after the divorce was finalized, Paige and I drove out to the Oregon coast. The Cannon Beach estate had sat empty since Lucille departed. We arrived on a Saturday morning. The marine layer was burning off, revealing a brilliant, cloudless sky over the Pacific Ocean. I unlocked the heavy mahogany doors, and we stepped into the grand foyer. The space felt different. The oppressive, pretentious energy that Lucille had cultivated was gone. It was just a house, a structure of glass cedar and stone waiting for a new narrative. Paige walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the waves crashing against the jagged shoreline. She turned back to me, a tentative smile breaking through the lingering sorrow of the past few months. "It feels empty," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vaulted room. I walked over to the nearest window and unlatched the heavy brass lock. I pushed the glass pane open, letting the cold, salt, heavy ocean breeze rush into the stagnant air of the living room. "It feels clean," I corrected her. We spent the entire weekend reclaiming the space. We arranged for a local charity to collect the heavy, ornate furniture Lucille had favored. We replaced the dark velvet drapes with sheer, breathable linen. We scrubbed the floors, opened every window, and let the coastal wind cleanse the architecture. We were erasing the shadows of the people who tried to break us. We were taking a location that was originally weaponized to tear us apart and transforming it into a sanctuary. The quiet consequences of the past 90 days had paved the way for a beautiful, uninterrupted peace. But as we sat on the back deck that Sunday evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew the journey required one final moment of reflection. The war was won, but the lessons extracted from the battlefield needed to be honored before the book could truly close. I sat in one of the Adirondack chairs on the expansive back deck, a steaming mug of black coffee resting in my hands. The morning air was crisp, carrying the sharp, invigorating scent of salt spray and wet cedar. Below the bluff, the Pacific Ocean hurled itself against the jagged sea stacks, a relentless display of raw, untamed power. Paige sat in the chair beside me, her knees pulled up to her chest, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. We had spent the previous evening watching the sunset. The sky painted in bruised shades of violet and crimson. Today the horizon was clear, a vast, uninterrupted expanse of blue. "This place finally feels like it belongs to us," Paige murmured, taking a sip from her own mug. "It does," I agreed, letting the heat of the ceramic seep into my palms. But it required a significant demolition to clear the foundation. I looked back at the house. The grand architecture, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the weathered gray shingles. It was a beautiful structure, but for the first 30 days I owned it, it had been a monument to my own self-erasure. I had purchased this sprawling estate not out of genuine generosity, but out of a desperate, misplaced desire to purchase peace. I had believed that if I provided enough capital, if I smoothed over enough financial craters, the Legacy Timber family would eventually recognize my value. That was the fundamental flaw in my architecture. I was attempting to buy respect from people who defined their worth by their ability to extract resources from others. You know, Paige said softly, her gaze fixed on the crashing waves. When Dad first came to my apartment and told me you were having a breakdown, a small part of me was terrified he might be right. You were working so hard. You were always exhausted. I thought the pressure had finally cracked you. I turned to look at my daughter. The admission did not hurt. It was a testament to the insidious effectiveness of Preston's gaslighting. He relied on that perception, I told her, my voice steady, devoid of the defensive edge that used to characterize my tone. He weaponized my work ethic. He knew that a woman running a successful technology firm is often viewed as being perpetually on the edge of burnout. He used the very ambition that funded his lifestyle as the evidence to prove my instability. Paige shook her head, a grim, ironic smile touching her lips. But he forgot that you analyze data for a living. You do not panic. You audit. I audited the marriage, I corrected gently, and the ledgers proved the partnership was bankrupt. We fell into a comfortable silence, listening to the rhythmic roar of the surf. The past 90 days had been a crucible. I had navigated public humiliation, financial espionage, boardroom coups, and the threat of federal indictment. I had severed a 14-year marriage and orchestrated the public ruin of the man I once loved. But sitting here, wrapped in the cold, clean air of the Oregon coast, the overriding emotion was not triumph. It was not the fiery, euphoric satisfaction of vengeance that cinema often portrays. It was relief. The relief was profound, a physical unburdening that permeated every muscle in my body. For over a decade, I had operated with a low-grade, constant anxiety. I was always waiting for the next financial shortfall, the next political crisis, the next social slight from Lucille that I would have to gracefully ignore. I had carried the weight of Preston's fragile ego and his mother's supreme entitlement for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Setting that weight down was the greatest luxury my wealth had ever afforded me. I did not regret purchasing the Cannon Beach estate. The $8.8 million was an exorbitant price tag, but it was the catalyst that finally shattered the illusion. Losing the illusion of my marriage was the necessary cost of gaining my freedom. If I had not bought this house, if Preston had not forged my signature to secure that fraudulent loan, I might have spent another decade funding his secret war against my company. I might have continued to contort myself into a compliant, invisible wife, slowly suffocating under the pressure of their demands. The house exposed the rot. It forced the parasites into the light. Mom Page asked, her voice pulling me back from my internal reflection. Do you think he ever actually cared about us? Or were we always just a funding mechanism for his political ambitions? It was the most painful question of the entire ordeal, the one that lingered in the quiet moments between the legal filings and the corporate victories. I set my coffee mug down on the wide wooden armrest. I looked at the young woman beside me, the daughter I had protected from the blast radius of her father's destruction. I think I began carefully choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon that Preston is a man who is incapable of distinguishing between love and utility. He loved the comfort we provided. He loved the status my capital afforded him. He loved the image of a devoted family man because it played well with his conservative donors. I paused, letting the cold reality settle between us. But the moment I stopped being useful, the moment I stopped acting as an unlimited line of credit and demanded basic respect, his love evaporated. It was replaced by a vicious, calculating malice. He did not hesitate to steal from me. He did not hesitate to lie to you. He was willing to destroy my reputation and jeopardize your future to protect his own facade. Paige pulled the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders. A transactional relationship, she murmured. Exactly, I confirmed. And that is the most important lesson you can extract from this entire nightmare, Paige. I leaned forward, ensuring she heard the absolute conviction in my voice. Generosity without boundaries is not kindness. It is an open invitation for exploitation. It eventually becomes permission for profound disrespect. You can build an empire, you can engineer groundbreaking technology, and you can generate immense wealth. But none of those achievements will protect you if you confuse love with self-sacrifice. The people who truly love you, I continued my gaze holding hers, will never ask you to dim your light so they can cast a larger shadow. They will never ask you to disappear so they can shine. They will stand beside you in the mud and the rain, and they will ensure the world knows exactly who built the foundation. Paige nodded slowly, the tears that had threatened to fall during the conversation safely held at bay. The young woman sitting next to me was no longer a pawn in her father's political game. She was a hardened survivor, equipped with the knowledge to protect her own boundaries. "We will not make that mistake again," Paige stated, a fierce, uncompromising resolve hardening her features. "No," I agreed, picking up my coffee mug once more. "We will not." The sun climbed higher into the cloudless sky, warming the cedar decking beneath our feet. The shadows of the early morning retreated, leaving the coastal estate bathed in brilliant, unfiltered light. The narrative of the Oregon timber dynasty was officially closed. Preston was a disgraced lobbyist awaiting federal sentencing. Lucille was an exiled socialite living in a suburban apartment. They were artifacts of a past I had formerly abandoned. My future was rooted in the fertile soil of the Willamette Valley and the crashing waves of the Pacific coast. My agricultural technology firm was expanding, driving sustainable innovation across the region. My relationship with my daughter was forged in the fires of absolute truth, stronger and more resilient than ever before. I stood up, walking to the edge of the deck, leaning against the sturdy wooden railing. The salt spray misted against my face, cold and awakening. If this story serves as anything more than a cautionary tale about the dangers of shadow banking and political ambition, I hope it serves as a testament to the power of a hard boundary. If you have ever found yourself twisting your own reality to accommodate someone else's delusion, if you have ever funded your own erasure to keep the peace, I want you to remember the silence in that grand foyer. I want you to remember the power of simply refusing to pay the toll any longer. The initial confrontation will be terrifying. The smear campaigns will be vicious. The people who benefited from your compliance will accuse you of madness, of cruelty, of profound selfishness. Let them. Let them scream into the void as you methodically cut the financial and emotional lifelines they have been parasitically feeding upon. Do not engage in the shouting matches. Do not negotiate with thieves while their hands are still inside your vault. Secure your assets, document the reality, and deliver the consequences with cold, clinical precision. The aftermath will not be a continuous celebration, but the quiet that follows, the profound, unshakable peace that settles into your bones when you finally set the heavy burden down, is worth any price. Take care of your heart, your intellect, and your capital. They are worth far more than any legacy mansion, any political title, or any conditional love. They are the tools you will use to build your own empire on your own terms in the blinding light of the truth. When the last guest fled the grand foyer of the Cannon Beach estate, and the heavy mahogany doors finally clicked shut on 14 years of marriage, you might assume my prevailing emotion was triumph. You might think that exposing my husband's staggering financial fraud, serving divorce papers in front of his political donors, and evicting my entitled mother-in-law was a victory of pure, unadulterated vengeance. But as I stood in the sudden, echoing silence of that $8.8 million mansion, the Pacific Ocean crashing against the sea stacks outside the towering windows, my mind did not linger on the money, the forged deeds, or the shattered political ambitions. My thoughts immediately went to Paige, the young woman I had helped raise, the daughter caught in the crossfire of a spectacular marital detonation. American culture places a massive, almost suffocating premium on the idyllic, traditional family. We are inundated from a very young age with images of the perfect unit, the successful providing father, the supportive, infinitely patient wife, the thriving children all gathered harmoniously around a polished dining table on a Sunday afternoon. We are taught implicitly and explicitly that maintaining this structure is our highest moral obligation as parents. For over a decade, I bought heavily into that mythology. I believed that by funding my husband's illusions by absorbing his family's blatant disrespect and by silencing my own intuition, I was providing my daughter with crucial stability. I confused financial security and the mere presence of a two-parent household with genuine emotional safety. I thought I was protecting her. But a house built on a foundation of lies is not a home. It is a beautifully decorated trap. And children are far more perceptive than we ever give them credit for. They do not just listen to the rules we set. They absorb the boundaries we fail to enforce. The true crucible of my story was not the moment I froze the bank accounts, nor was it the dramatic confrontation with Preston's shadow lenders. The defining moment, the absolute core of my responsibility as a mother, occurred in the quiet, dim light of my kitchen, sitting across from a 22-year-old girl who was about to lose the father she thought she knew. Preston had tried to utilize traditional parenting norms as a weapon of mass destruction. He went to Paige's apartment, cried manufactured strategic tears, and attempted to poison her against me by claiming I was mentally unstable. He relied on the conventional, deeply ingrained belief that a child will naturally rush to protect a wounded parent. He wanted to use her unconditional loyalty as a human shield for his federal crimes. This is exactly where the standard playbook of American family responsibility often fails us. We are told to keep adult problems strictly away from our children. We are told that preserving a parent's image in the eyes of their child is a sacred, unbreakable duty, that shielding them from the ugly adult realities of the world is the very essence of good parenting. I fiercely reject that conventional wisdom. It is a dangerous, toxic fallacy. Shielding a young adult from a manipulative, toxic parent is not protection. It is complicity. When we lie to our children to preserve the facade of a broken family structure, we are not keeping them safe from the world. We are teaching them that deceit is an acceptable form of love. We are actively training them to ignore their own intuition, to tolerate manipulation, and to eventually accept abuse in their own future relationships under the noble guise of keeping the peace. If I had hidden Preston's crimes from Paige, I would have essentially endorsed his behavior as a normal marital dynamic. True parental responsibility requires a far more agonizing kind of love. It requires the immense, terrifying courage to let your child's heart break so that their moral compass can properly align. When Paige stood in my kitchen, armed with her father's lies and radiating defensive anger, I did not demand her allegiance. I did not scream or retaliate with my own emotional manipulation. Instead, I placed the encrypted laptop on the cold granite island and showed her the objective, irrefutable truth. I showed her the embezzled funds, the forged signatures, and the deliberate corporate sabotage. I handed her the agonizing reality that the man who taught her how to drive, the man who had adopted her, was actively trying to destroy our lives to serve his own insatiable ego. Watching the innocence drain from your child's eyes is an agony no parent should ever have to endure. As she wept in my arms, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs, mourning the death of the father she thought she knew, I felt the heavy, devastating weight of what I had done. But emotional awareness in parenting means recognizing that short-term devastation is sometimes the only bridge to long-term survival. I gave her the truth because fairness and honesty must supersede the fragile ego of any parent. I gave her the truth because I wanted her to know unequivocally that a woman's reality is not subject to a man's revision. In American society, we frequently measure successful parenting by the external milestones our children achieve. The prestigious university degrees, the lucrative careers, the picture-perfect marriages. But I believe the true measure of our guidance lies in the boundaries our children are eventually willing to draw. Over those harrowing 30 days, Paige learned a brutal, indelible lesson about the difference between a transactional relationship and unconditional love. She learned that respect cannot be purchased with coastal estates, and that anyone who asks you to diminish your own light to make them feel larger is fundamentally incapable of loving you. We cannot control the pain, the betrayals, or the heartbreaks our children will inevitably encounter in this world, but we can completely control the emotional vocabulary we give them to process it. By choosing absolute transparency over the comfort of the traditional family facade, I equipped my daughter with the greatest inheritance I could possibly offer: the unwavering, ironclad ability to trust her own judgment. If you have ever found yourself twisting your own reality to accommodate someone else's delusion, or if you have ever had to unlearn the dangerous lessons a toxic family taught you, you are not alone. I invite you to like, subscribe, and join me on Emily Told Stories. Here, we explore the quiet battles we fight behind closed doors, and we remind each other that finding your voice is always worth the cost of the fallout. Our culture romanticizes the concept of self-sacrifice, wrapping it in the noble, poetic language of duty and familial devotion. We celebrate the mothers and wives who bleed themselves dry to keep the household intact. But I have come to a very different, unyielding conclusion. Generosity without boundaries is simply permission for disrespect. The most profound responsibility you have as a parent is not to keep your family together at all costs. It is to demonstrate, with the unvarnished truth of your own life, what acceptable love actually looks like. When I look back at the coastal estate, the millions of dollars lost and recovered, and the smoldering ashes of an Oregon timber dynasty, I do not see a tragedy. I see the necessary, beautiful price of a priceless education. We spend our entire lives terrified of the violent storms that might tear our homes apart, rarely stopping to ask if the walls we built were actually meant to hold us in. The next time you find yourself remaining silent just to keep the peace, look closely at the people sitting around your polished dining table. Ask yourself, in the quiet, honest, and terrifying space of your own heart, are you truly protecting them? Or are you just teaching them how to quietly drown?